They often have these like alternative institutions or courses or whatnot, and they're often highly exploitative in the marketing and promotion of it. So it's all based on like cultivate the power of social relationship and exploit it for maximum profit. Their confidence is never adjusted according to their level of knowledge or expertise. It's always extremely high. But for the gurus, all that matters, like in science, is kind of Nobel, right? Like
we're just asking questions.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, everybody, welcome back to Archaeology with Flint Dibble, where you know that I do real archaeology and I try to debunk pseudoscience. And on that note, I am joined by a great friend of the channel, Dr. Chris Kavanagh, who's an anthropology professor, as well as the co-host of Decoding the Gurus, where he decodes this phenomenon of modern gurus, which I hope we can agree, maybe we'll get into it in depth in a different episode, that some of these pseudo-archaeologists qualify as modern gurus. But hi, Chris, how are you doing today?
I'm doing grand. Although I feel, Flint, I must mention that although I moonlight as an anthropologist, technically I'm employed as a psychology professor. So associate professor, just to be clear. But yes, so it's easy to understand because on the podcast we're introduced as a psychologist and an anthropologist. But I'm like kind of a strange anthropologist. So I'm just
so you're telling me that you guys are lying. You're doing the traditional guru trick of saying that you're an anthropologist when you're actually a psychologist?
Well, my PhD is in anthropology. So I technically am a qualified anthropologist insofar as that applies. But I work in the psychology department.
This sounds like both polymathism and self-aggrandizement.
I think it's I'll call it interdisciplinary boundaries straddling. That's what it is.
I got you now. And this is where we're going to have some fun, I think. So, okay. So tell me a bit, what is a modern guru? And just tell me if you want to show slides or clips.
Well, so I think a lot of people are probably familiar with charismatic gurus in the popular presentation. The two common meanings of it are one, like kind of spiritual gurus. There was the like bad comedy film in the 2000s with Mike Myers called The Love Guru, and that kind of thing where you have people often associated with like Indian religions or other like spiritual esoteric traditions and providing teachings, and that's the kind of traditional guru. It also obviously has an actual history, right, where people are identified as gurus, where they're expert teachers that can provide information about esoteric topics or some skill. And there is the more contemporary meaning, maybe particularly in the West, where it came to refer to like anybody with a specialist skill, like a stats guru or a tech guru or that kind of thing. And we are talking about modern or secular gurus as like another subcategory of the phenomenon, where there are some overlaps with those previous categories, but the general difference is one, that they're modern, usually engaged in online activities and spreading their message via modern media. But two, unlike traditional spiritual gurus, they are usually claiming that their knowledge and insight comes from secular sources. It can be mastery of science, can be mastery of like politics or history or these kind of things, and even sometimes like psychological interpretation of religious traditions, for example. That tends to be the difference, that they aren't exactly like your kind of charismatic cult leaders that many people imagine if you say like a spiritual guru. Yeah, that they are more often than not emphasizing secular scientific sources of knowledge for their insights.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I think we've all come across characters like this on the internet, where they're using their depth of expertise and knowledge, sometimes not always actual expertise and knowledge, into sort of a modern scientific field or technology to be able to build an audience, right? And to develop a very intense parasocial relationship with large numbers of people. Yeah, I think it's an interesting phenomenon. And so would you say that this phenomenon is good or bad for our society today?
Bad. It's rather bad, unfortunately. Charismatic figures are, I think, a universal of human societies. Just there's religious figures, there's political figures, there's always going to be people that are charismatic and gather followings. But secular gurus, as we define it, have some like specific characteristics that make them harmful. And as you mentioned, some of it revolves around encouraging and cultivating like parasocial devotion to an individual, right? And then the other thing which they often do will be disparage mainstream things that they present as mainstream or institutional knowledge, talk down expertise or argue that it's all corrupt, that you don't need to listen to it. Media is lying, academics are lying, journalists are lying, politicians are lying. Who's telling the truth? Well, the secular guru and their friends typically. And so it isn't healthy because it discourages people from seeking out, other sources of information. And it very much personifies like sources of information around an individual and like a parasocial devotion to that person. So I think that is a bad thing for society because we're seeing the consequences of it now around like populist movements and online polemical figures and that kind of thing. So yeah, that's why I identified like kind of 11 traits that are common amongst them, and almost all of them are negative, right? Like in individual aspect, there might be an aspect which is neutral, but if you're scoring highly on all 11 of these, the chance that you're having a positive impact on the world is rather low because there are things like narcissism and conspiracy mongering and so on.
Yeah, I mean, and to some degree, from my perspective, I really want to highlight that anti-establishment sentiment. And in many ways, if you were talking about, I had Manveer Singh. You had a slide with him about ancient, shamanism through time, and so I had him
Yes.
on recently to talk about it. And I think that might be one of the major differences between traditional gurus or shamans, if you will, and these modern secular gurus. Is traditional shamans are not anti-establishment necessarily. They fit into the society within which they exist. They're not necessarily defined as being anti and opposed to other structures within societies. While this modern phenomenon is very much defined as being anti-establishmentarian and anti-establishmentarianism, which is a very long and lovely word, but
Yeah,
and
I
also
feel the
very
same.
harmful to societies because it's about tearing down rather than trying to build something that is supportive.
Yes, although there are some like nuances I would add. That one, we've talked to Manveer as well and discussed like the overlaps and discontinuities. And actually, he was in Japan just like a week ago. I met him
Oh, cool.
and his wife, so I'm friendly with Manveer and like his work. But I think that in terms of the anti-establishment like sentiment, which definitely is a feature, it's also worth noting that in some respects it can be seen as like a pose because they can be aligned with the establishment. For example, the Trump MAGA movement is supported by a lot of these figures, right? The Trump movement is in power in America. It is the establishment, but yet it's still
But its rhetoric is anti-establishment.
exactly. It's the
Yeah.
deep state, right? It's a lot of it. It's worth noting that these people can have huge media profiles. They can have, sycophantic interviews on the biggest podcasts or the biggest media outlets. The whole right-wing media can promote them as, important, insightful figures. And they still manage to present it that they are, taking it to the man. They're punk rock. They're against the establishment. So, you've experienced this with Graham Hancock, where you are constantly presented as the kind of big bad archaeologist, even though he is the person with the Netflix status and the Rogan appearance and so on. So I know that you're aware of that habit, but I just think it's worth noting that like the anti-establishment thing is in many respects opposed because they can promote establishments if they align with their particular ideological beliefs.
Fully agree. I fully agree. I think this anti-establishment rhetoric is actually extremely hypocritical because oftentimes these are the popular media figures and then they rail against the media and it's like, hello, you're friggin' Joe Rogan. You are the media. Like you are one of the top media personalities out there. So yeah, I think that hypocrisy, which I think lines up with some of your other criteria as well, is important to note. Just to push you a little bit, what is the worst thing that you see impacting the world from these modern gurus sort of phenomenon?
I guess it probably is the strong push against any other sources of knowledge or established sources of knowledge. So I don't have an issue with like people making strong critiques of academia or particular theories or this kind of thing. It's not that. It's more that creating this pervasive view that everyone's lying. They're all corrupt. Like, and very much that knowledge is like subjective, right? It's all down to whichever interpretation. Climate change, there's a lot of people with a lot of graphs and, really scientists are just interested in getting the next paycheck, right? So it undermines that there is, in a way, it's very postmodern, that the notion that there is any established facts or truths. And the fact that it takes that pose and it often like will tear down people that are devoting themselves to, studying a topic for their lives or like doing genuine work and not necessarily earning much or whatever, but present them as like egomaniacs who are just interested in self-enrichment. Like, a Fauci figure, for example, now a universal villain, but somebody that was wealthy, yes, and succeeded, but also devoted their life to like public health. That I think is perhaps the worst because that can lead to legitimate targeting of people that like really damages lives, makes people's security concerns, and helps to enable populist leaders to come to power. And from my point of view, like most populist leaders are, harmful for society, for democracy, and that kind of thing. So I think that undermining of trust in any institution is probably their worst impact. But there's a lot to choose from.
Yeah, I agree. And just to add to that, well, the way I describe some of what you're talking about is they caricature scholars and intellectuals as kind of cartoon villains. And I've joked about this in private chats with Peter Hotez, and I was pleased to see him refer to it in that way on a recent podcast he was on. And so this is what they do. This is what they've done to me. They turn me with memes and everything like this into just some evil, sniveling cartoon villain. And I find it funny. I get regular comments almost every single day from somebody who's like, I came to your channel to troll you, and then actually I realized you're nothing like how they present you. So it really is just a caricaturing and turning us into this evil sort of creature. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you mentioned the perfect example there because Peter Hotez, for example, somebody that worked on making low-cost vaccines available to developing countries, right, to try and like sidestep in some respects like the profiteering of pharmaceutical companies, should be a hero amongst the people that present themselves as like enemies of profit-based medicine and that kind of thing. But he's not. He's a villain because he's promoting vaccinations. And as Joe Rogan has done to you, he also targeted like the way that Peter Hotez looks, right? He's not a hugely muscular. I mean, he's fine. He's a perfectly reasonable person, but he's not RFK Jr., lifting weights in the sun. So,
according to Rogan, I think that both myself and Peter Hotez are weak, bitchy little men. And Peter is going to come on here at some point, so I hope to have a conversation with him about anti-science when his new book with Michael Mann comes out.
On that point, I would also say, Flint, I consume a lot of like the alternative media content and whatnot, and they really are in a glass house when it comes to talking about like being bitchy
Yeah,
individuals.
of
Like
course.
they might have bigger muscles. That might be true. At least Jocko Willink and
A
Rogan.
few of
Although
them, not all of them. Some
yeah,
pretty
not
weak.
yeah, quite. This is true. It's not universal, but even those that do, I don't think it's not all naturally achieved. There's a lot of human growth hormone and
Yeah.
testosterone going around, but the amount of bitching on those podcasts, the amount, it's very hard to overstate. There will be almost no episode where the mainstream media is not disparaged. The topic of they wouldn't let you talk about this and their persecution. So it really is incredible hypocrisy. But that's
Oh yeah,
normal.
just last week Rogan was bitching about me again.
Yeah.
So with Danny Jones saying, "Oh
Well,
my
you're in
God,
the
the
pantheon
nasty
now.
things I've said." Yeah. Yeah, and then I mean, as you know, I think there's a lot of overlaps with other very negative things, conspiracy cultures and anti-Semitism and racism and bigotry, and so there's all these kind of issues that these gurus sort of different ones, of course, overlap with in different ways and in different contexts. So it's a real troubling phenomenon.
I think part of the thing is that, like, a moderate style of politics or a moderate ideology is not really exciting enough, right? So they often tend to latch to like populist, more extreme points of view. So it isn't always the case that they themselves, were originally super ideologically attached to a particular point of view or whatever. It's more that way is the way that they often lean and that their audiences often go as a result. So yeah, like you say, it's a mixed bag depending on which ones you talk about. But things like anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and like anti-vaccine stuff are just, they're almost canon, like
Yeah, they are.
in a
They
lot of
very
the
are.
content.
As I've learned. I mean, I can't count the number of times people have told me that I have turbo cancer because of getting vaccinated. And I have a fun story for you. Did you know that my cancer was diagnosed 3 days after I got my first COVID vaccine shot?
Wow.
So
Well,
maybe
that
it was
doesn't
caused by
surprise me.
but do you know
Yeah.
how I know for sure that my cancer was not caused by that vaccine shot?
That surprised me.
The biopsy was taken before I got the vaccine.
Ah,
So it was cut
well,
out of me beforehand. The results came in right afterwards. So, it's
well,
just a coincidence of
this
timing.
the problem there, Flint, is you're assuming that there isn't the possibility of retroactive causality. Look, there was a paper published in 2011 that in the leading psychology journal, 11 studies that showed retroactive causality was possible. So I'm
So
just
you're
saying,
saying
don't rule it
vaccines
out.
have time travel technology in them as well?
They've got like that's the least of our concerns with them. But they've got whatever they're cooking up there in Wuhan. There's time traveling vaccines. That doesn't, yeah.
Yeah, I got some sources in Wuhan that we're working together so that I can use a vaccine that'll send me back to ancient Greece to study them in person.
The thing is, like, I'm just joking, obviously, but that is not that far from things that I often hear in the content that we covered. This would be the kind of riff that people in the broken sphere would be like, yeah, man, it is a bit
This is going to
strange, right?
become a viral clip right there. They're going to be like, Dibble's collaborating with Wuhan to travel back in time to change the past.
Yeah, I did also get accused at one point when I was talking about lab leak and the kind of conspiracies that are constructed around that. I did get accused of being on the pay of Eco Health Alliance because Peter Daszak retweeted me or something like that, and some like very good online sleuth tracked me down to like an anonymous rave account in Oxford, or they were reviewing drugs and raves, and they were like, this is Chris Kavanagh's secret account. The fact that I'm visibly in Japan and have lived here for 10 years, that didn't stop, but that just speaks to the kind of quality of the conspiratorial research.
Oh yeah,
that
I've
is
seen
common.
probably 100 different accounts, maybe 1,000 over various social media accused of being Flint Dibble burner accounts.
That's it. There's a lot of, you've got a large network
I
out
already
there.
spend enough time on social media. I don't need to spend time on a burner account. Like, Jesus Christ. I'm pretty open in my beliefs and I like to think I wear my beliefs on my sleeve, in an authentic way. And so, I try to, at least, because I want to show that I'm not captured by an audience. That's why I stick to archaeology and phenomena that I'm studying, like this right here, to get informed by somebody like you. Okay, I figure we can get a sense of what these 11 traits are, and then I hope afterwards you can do a fun decoding of me, and I'll probably disagree with you. And then what I thought we'd do is the one thing that I think is, you say these are all negative, but I personally believe that there's something we can try to learn as scholars from the success that these secular gurus have had. I think we need to work to make scholarship and education cool again, let's say. And I certainly agree with you. Some of these traits are just intensely toxic. There's no saving grace for them. Others, on the other hand, I think that we can try to adopt in a nuanced and ethical fashion, not to the extreme level, but in the right way, to try to break through the noise that is our world and get scholarship and education more popular again. And so that's where I hope we can kind of end the conversation on, maybe with a bit of positivity, and maybe hopefully something that our colleagues and other science communicators can take home and maybe think about how to integrate a little bit to overpower these gurus.
I will be interested to hear you try and make like this, because I feel like, from my perspective, it's like Boromir holding the ring and saying, "It is a gift, we can use it." And no, Boromir, we cannot use the weapon of the enemy. So,
well, then maybe we'll end with a lively debate. Look, you do these scores 1 to 5. I don't think going to 5 on any of them is a good thing, but I think maybe for a few of them, going to a 2 or a 3 is actually a good thing, as long as you recognize how you're doing it and you pull back and nuance it at times.
Well, yeah, I think there is things to be said, because it might be the case that, like, if your goal is to, increase engagement and stuff, that some of them do function in that way. But I will say, as well, as a disclaimer that's worth noting, that these are 11 like characteristics that we've noticed recurring in the people that we cover. Like we were doing, covering lots of different people, and we kept noticing, oh, this guy's doing the same thing as the last one, right? This is a very similar thing. And then after a while, we were like, oh, we should make a note, right, of these characteristics as we go along. And then we did, and we scored everybody, and we added the 11th one, the moral grandstanding one, relatively recently, maybe about 6 months ago. But it is the case that, like, this is just our observations, right? Like, some of them are based on like stuff from psychology or other anthropology and stuff that we're familiar with, but it is really just our observations of recurrent features. So it's perfectly reasonable for people to take issue or say, is this as important as that? And like, I would say the ones that I've highlighted in green, I think are probably more central than other features. So these are recurring characteristics, but none of them individually is like necessary or sufficient on their own. It's more like when they all come together, people are closer to the secular guru template. But our argument is not like you cannot be a secular guru, if you don't do all 11. It's more like
like I would certainly agree that here's a chart that one of your fans made for Gwyneth Paltrow. My understanding of Gwyneth Paltrow, she's probably what I would consider a modern guru, but at the same time, she doesn't display all of these traits.
She's probably more towards like the health and wellness space, which is like, but there can be overlap, right? Andrew Huberman is in the health and wellness space, but he's very firmly in the secular guru category. So,
no, that makes sense to me. Okay, then let's dive into some of these 11 traits. I guess the first one is polymathic ability, or galaxy-brainness, as you call it. But I feel like it needs a D, galaxy-brainedness. But maybe I'm wrong.
That's a good point. Yeah, I think we took it from the Tim and Eric meme of the guy going.
Yeah. But I just meant that it needs the ED, galaxy-brained, is how I'd call somebody.
Yeah, I agree. But so I think though that is why Matt took that term, and I think I gave you a clip which I think helps to illustrate this quite nicely. Jordan Hall talking about how many paradigms he runs compared to a normal human.
Okay, let's play this clip.
Well, it's pre-trans. Why is this not a Quaker meeting? The Quakers are doing something awesome, but they're running one paradigm. what you have to actually say is, okay, let's run, well, at the very minimum, let's run both the Lakota and the Quaker paradigms. While we're at it, I'm usually running, I don't know, 70 or 90 distinct paradigms simultaneously all the time. And there's many. And the idea is not to try to collapse them down to a single master paradigm, but actually to allow each one of them to have the particular piece that they're holding, just like eyes and ears. Say, okay, cool.
So not one or two. And just to note, Jordan Hall has subsequently took a Christian turn, as many have in the Gurus of late. So he has actually collapsed things down to a dominant master paradigm. But at this stage, he was at least saying that's dangerous to do that. We don't want to do that.
We need to have 70 to 90 paradigms going at once. I mean, that reminds me of another thing, which is just the jargon. Like, what the hell does a paradigm mean here? Like, it's a meaningless term that sounds flashy. And it's like, of course, we're all complex individuals who might be thinking, well, what am I going to eat for lunch next? And I'm having a conversation with Chris, and I got to finish this paper later. And so I got 3 paradigms going on in my brain right now. But,
in his case, I believe the paradigms are referring, I mean, such insofar as they do refer to anything concrete, is like worldviews. So, if you're doing sociology, you might study health from the perspective of a Marxist or a functionalist or an interpretivist, or, or different schools in archaeology or whatever the case might be. Mm-hmm. Now, you might, Flint, as a PhD, be able to, spin 5 or 6 at the same time to think about how they would look at different issues. But someone like Jordan Hall, they're doing 70 to 90 just while they're washing the dishes. Like, that's it. That's it. So it's that presentation that, like, you've got an all-encompassing knowledge across a diverse array of topics. You're not like, you might have a core specialty, but you can basically apply it, to every field: politics, history, science, genetics, maths, physics. It's all within your scope, philosophy. And rather crucially, because I think there is something for people being willing to, talk about topics that they're not necessarily expert in, just to give their opinion on. I don't think there's any issue with that. But the difference with what the Gurus do is their confidence is never adjusted according to their level of knowledge or expertise. It's always extremely high. And even if they add in disclaimers, it's really like hollow disclaimers, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of there to give them an escape if they need, like the way Graham Hancock, floats so many ideas about lots of different areas: metallurgy and paleontology and archaeology and all these different fields.
From astronomy and the Younger Dryas to, the Sphinx and geology to et cetera, these astronomical alignments from megaliths. It's just sort of like, he'll go into any sort of topic as if he's an expert, which, all right, to be fair, if we show kind of this chart that you made for Carl Sagan, it's pretty clear that this is a flaw that most science communicators have, because science communicators oftentimes communicate a wide variety of fields beyond just the one that they're trained in. And Carl Sagan, but not just him. I could think of most TV presenters, even that are scientists, that are trained as scientists. They're oftentimes presenting on fields that are outside of their own expertise. One of my favorites I just recorded with Alice Roberts. I absolutely love her. I think she does a great job, but she will talk on a wide variety of topics beyond what her training is in.
I think for me, the crucial issue is, like, if you do that, do you at least caveat the level of confidence you have? And, like, I know that in science communication, like, caveats or this kind of thing is like deaf in a way, right? Because it can read like you don't have confidence in what you're saying. But I think it's a crucial distinction between, like, public intellectuals and gurus, is that public intellectuals do, when they're discussing things, like Sean Carroll, for example, somebody that does Q&As and answers questions about a broad array of topics. But every time he does it, he speaks very clearly about what his point of view is. But he's always like, no, I don't know a lot about this topic, but from what I have read, this is the impression that I've got. And you're clear if he's speaking from, like, a area that he's rock solid, very confident about, versus, is this a topic that I've just read a couple of things about, and this is my, initial thoughts on it. And that's the distinction that I think is, like, very important there.
Yeah, I think to some degree that in certain types of media, when you qualify your statement, it's going to get edited out. because that's just when you're producing something that I'm sure that happens all the time with David Attenborough or others like Alice Roberts or whatever, who do great jobs, but of course they come off confident with what they're saying, and those qualifications are oftentimes slimmed down. But of course, in a venue like social media or long form podcasting or YouTubing, you have the ability to make those qualifications, and that's a big important point. One example I can think of that was done really badly by Graham Hancock recently is he had this rebuttal video of me, and he's talking about metallurgy in ice cores, and he presents this evidence, and he's like, well, there's these trace elements in these ice cores. The scientists say that it's their opinion that that's not metallurgy, but I disagree with them. And it's like, what do you mean you disagree with them? You don't study this stuff at all. Why would you disagree with the experts who have spent their entire lives studying and publishing these things from no reason other than your opinion? And yeah.
Yeah. And there's we recently spoke with anthropologist, cognitive anthropologist Dorsa Amir, and she has this acronym that she called like STUPID, the danger of being stupid, which was studying topics uninformed by prior investigations in the discipline. And I like that because she's interested in interdisciplinary work, but she was saying, you know, a lot of people venture very confident opinions on things without doing the requisite like background, like even just cursory investigations into the literature, and that we should try and avoid that wherever that's possible. But like, so Graham Hancock could have a different opinion, right? Like, if he'd spent time, and it might not be a good different opinion, but like I don't even get the feeling that a lot of times that he's really read or paid much attention to, you know, the counter thing.
Clearly
it's more
not.
like, yeah,
he just wants it to be another way because it matches his lost civilization ideas, fiction ideas. Okay, so that's the sense of galaxy-brainness, which is where we're thinking about everything polymathism. And I will make the point that unlike Carl Sagan, I actually do try to stick to one of my goals as I do popular communication is to stick as closely to archaeology and my study of sort of pseudoscience as closely as possible, and not try to pretend I'm something I'm not. That said, I don't have problems with science communicators that go more broad. I think that there's room for good science communicators to do that. Okay, so let's move on to number two. Like I said, to me, this is the most dangerous, and I think you sort of mentioned that earlier, this anti-establishment sentiment.
Yes, so there's a clip that I think is a good illustration of what I'm talking about here and the level it goes. It's the one about nobody in institutions can tell the truth.
And who's speaking this?
Oh, this is Douglas Murray speaking to Eric Weinstein. This is like a British right-wing pundit and the online guru par excellence, Eric Weinstein.
And then you get on to the institution one, which is that nobody, as you know, nobody in an institution now can tell the truth. And it's slightly worse than that, which is that...
I'm used to my saying stuff like that, and then people calling me an extremist. Do you believe what you just said?
Yes, I mean, I don't doubt that there are some...
My phrase is almost everybody, particularly in an institution, is lying about almost everything, almost all the time. That's where I believe we've gotten.
Right.
Wow, talk about some cynicism. I am like, geez Louise.
So this is the distinction from like, you know, because people are like, well, isn't it good to be, you know, like we should be critical about institutions and science as well. You know, there was the replication crisis, the ongoing methodological reforms, and there's been, and yes, that's good, but that's not what these guys are talking about, right? That level of cynicism that you're talking about there is much more extreme than that. And I will also point out, just to highlight that like hypocrisy is a recurrent feature here. This is Douglas Murray, who recently was embroiled in controversy with Joe Rogan because he was pointing out that Joe Rogan is platforming, you know, people promoting alternative or revisionist histories about World War II, Darrell Cooper. And he made the point that like, yes, there's issues with institutions, but we do care about expertise, right? And he wanted to make this point around the Israel conflict as well. But compare that to what he said there, right? And this is, Yeah, so the ability to completely contradict yourself also doesn't seem to be any objection to people in this field. So that's
Which I'm
quite
sure
impressive.
ordinary people who are speaking a lot of times being clipped out of context disagree with oneself. But these are two big core things, which is like we trust institutions and experts or we don't. And it's one of the things that I'm putting together at some point further down the pipeline, talking about Rogan's hypocrisy towards scholars, where he cites scholarship and science all the time, but then he goes ahead and he shits on scholars and scientists, and then he goes ahead and complains why scholars and scientists don't want to come on his podcast. And so it's just like core hypocrisy right there all the time. So yeah, so I think the inability to recognize their own hypocrisy is profound.
Yeah, and
ways.
the other point that I'll make is like, one thing that Matt often has highlighted is that in so doing this kind of undermining of institutions, you're leaving people with like an epistemic black hole in a way. Like, well, so who can we trust? And often the answer is, Joe Rogan or the alternative media or whoever the guru figure is. And in the same respect, just to nail down on the hypocrisy again, if there is something from the mainstream media that supports their view, or academia, there's a study or something that they view, they have no issue with like citing it positively, citing figures from institutions that they think undermine vaccine safety or this kind of thing. So institutions are corrupt and lying all the time. You can't trust science unless the particular study or particular figure happens to be useful. And that kind of twin thing about tear down the establishment, the institutions, and set yourself up as the alternative truth bringer. That is the kind of like 1-2 punch that I think is the thing that makes it very harmful.
Yes, I agree. I think that's also it's a very effective rhetoric for them, because you tear down other alternatives and then you get them hooked on their own charisma. And so it's sort of how they build their following in many ways. And it's done through creating this kind of hostility towards other groups, and then charisma and parasocial relationships towards oneself. I would, in this context, I think it's important to play your second clip about the universities. Who's speaking on this one?
This is Eric Weinstein again.
Okay.
So talking about universities and their ability to suppress like interesting ideas.
I think that you, Pia, and myself are indicative of an entire layer of Gen X academicians, and now probably millennial academicians, whose work was suppressed. And we don't feel comfortable saying these words, which is that the purpose of the university system in the time that we were there was in large measure to make sure that big, disruptive new ideas did not upset the apple cart, because there was the ability to deny. I mean, this is what you guys call interference competition, which is that you keep people from sitting down in the chairs in a game of musical chairs. And then the idea is we have lovely parting gifts for our contestants.
Ay. This is so depressing.
In that case, it's also worth mentioning, because it will come up again, that is Eric talking about his brother, Brett Weinstein, and his wife, Pia, I think. I forget his wife's name, but she's involved in economics. So he's talking about them all having these ideas that were like kind of suppressed by, academia, which only exists to kind of, strangle revolutionary concepts and novel insights.
Which is the exact opposite of my experience in academia, where novel insights that you can convince your peers of as being legitimate are very much rewarded.
Yes. Well, that actually kind of connects to the next feature, the self-aggrandizement, the narcissism, because part of the issue there is like, if you are someone that hasn't like succeeded in a particular discipline, like for example, you are a figure like Eric Weinstein or Brett Weinstein, who do have PhDs, right, and do have like backgrounds at least in relevant fields, but have not had any measure of success, or people have not regarded your theories as revolutionary. So why? Right. What is the explanation for that? And one explanation could be that your theories are are not that revolutionary or not that well evidenced. But obviously that can't be the case. So the answer has to be that there is a, suppression and conspiracy against you. That's the only reason that it could be that you haven't been properly recognized. So there is often that, like, the gurus have these special insights which their audience will often recognize, but the fact that they are not accepted by the mainstream shows how corrupt the mainstream is, right? Because otherwise they would accept it. There isn't any other option, really. Like, there's no other explanation.
The man is keeping me down, is what it is.
Yeah.
I mean, now look, higher education is imploding. There's lots of really good scholars who are not able to find stable employment due to various reasons. And so I want to make it clear that, like, there are systemic issues with higher education, university structures, and stuff like that. But suppression of ideas is certainly not one that I've seen too much of as something that is impacting people's careers. Yeah, I mean, academia and higher education and scholarship is built upon consensus and convincing your peers. So if you're not able to convince your peers of an idea, then either you need to rethink your idea or you need to rethink how you're communicating it. But if you're going directly to the public in this self-aggrandized way, well, then that's just rhetoric, because you're going to people that don't have the capabilities and experience and expertise to judge your ideas and your communication of them.
This is part of the issue, is that, like, I think if you're somebody with narcissistic tendencies, right? I'm not talking about people that are, like, diagnosed as narcissists, right? Not the clinical definition, but just people that are in their behaviors. Yeah. What people, note as, like, narcissistic, self-absorbed and very self-promoting, this kind of thing. And in a lot of the people that we cover, what's interesting is they're objectively successful. They're rich. They have huge audiences. They publish books, that are translated and very popular. They're invited to give speeches all over the world, all these kind of things. And yet they're incredibly fragile around, like, any suggestion that, they are not as brilliant as they claim. And they will often, in this respect, reference how many people download or watch or are interacting with their content. So Jordan Peterson once referenced, or not once, he's done this multiple times, but he conflated the number of people who watched his content, so like a video that had 5 million views, as the amount of people that agreed with him. He's like, 5 million people, find this valuable. And sure, like, the majority of people consuming Jordan Peterson's content probably do agree with him, right? Like, that's likely the case. But it's just that thing where, like, there's an automatic assumption that, like, attention being paid proves that they are right. And what very often doesn't filter into that is exactly the point that you made, that, like, you can get attention for promoting, outlandish things or conspiracy theories and
of course,
like, wild rhetoric, but that doesn't get accounted. It's just like, if you got attention, then that shows that you're right. And that's not the case, right? Like, that is not the case in academia, that just, like, it's, or at least it's an ideal that just because you are, like, an influential person with, a lot of attention, you're able to give, like, a keynote speech or whatever, it shouldn't matter if the evidence is against you, right? Like, that's the ideal of academia. And there's plenty of cases where that has proven to be the case. There's actually a clip which highlights the level of self-aggrandizement and connects to the previous one. Is if you see the one that is about the 3 Nobel Prizes.
Yeah.
This is Eric talking about the same 3 people that you just heard him mention: his wife, himself, and his brother. And I think this highlights, like, the level to which they are viewing, the insights that they have and how far they're not being acknowledged.
Okay, let's do it.
It is time to do battle with the oppressive structures that have been used to silence new ideas. If in my family I assert that there might be as many as 3 revolutionary Nobel quality ideas in one clutch, how many ideas might there be suppressed if that is actually true?
There's so much to unpack there. Oh my God. We have to do battle. Okay. Within my family, within the clutch, even. Like, who's
clutch.
My clutch of children are growing into Nobel Prize winners.
Yeah. So in that, I mean, like, there's a lot done by the heavy lifting of if what I say is true, right? Like, yeah, big if true, but like no one on the planet, to my knowledge, there's no family with 3 Nobel Prizes in it. So, Nobel, but this is kind of the funny
Curie's
thing.
got 2. Is there? Didn't one of their children or grandchildren get a Nobel Prize? Am I wrong? Maybe not.
Oh, okay, maybe I'm wrong.
Here we go. We have like 5 of them.
Fact
According
checking
to Google AI.
Wait, 3
We
people
have
in families?
Marie Curie, Pierre Curie,
in the Curies.
Irene Joliot-Curie, Frederick Joliot-Curie, and then Henry Richardson Labouisse Jr., spouse of Eve Curie. So we're talking, that's some serious. That
is a clutch. I'm like thinking nepotism plays some role in this. I'm just throwing this out there, galaxy-brainness, because that seems a high level in one family. But okay, so there's president. That means that
to be honest, it's due to 2 different Nobel Prizes that 4 of them shared, and then a third one that eventually came later that was a peace prize. So Marie and Pierre shared it in 1903. Marie won it again in 1911, and then Irene, she won it in chemistry and physics. And then, which makes sense with all the radiation stuff that she did.
Right, sure. It was important. I'm genuinely impressed.
But then Irene and Frederick won it together in 1935. And then Henry Richardson Labouisse won it on behalf of UNICEF. So to a certain degree, we can explain away some of this stuff there.
Look, I can still say, though, that, therefore there's precedent. So we can say that Eric's claim is not prima facie, like insane. It has happened before. But even with that, I will say that, like, I'm in a scientific adjacent field, right? But I know scientists. I'm sure you do as well, Flint, right?
I am a scientist. I work in the lab studying isotopes. Yeah,
that counts. Can you get Nobel Prizes for archaeology?
Well, there's only 2 that have ever been given. One was in physics for developing radiocarbon dating to Willard Libby. The second one was more recently in the field of biology, I guess it was, to Pablo Svante for decoding the Neanderthal genomes. Okay,
but these are both reasonable things to give people Nobel Prizes for. But the point I would make here is, like, from my knowledge of academia, most people are not angling for Nobel Prize. They don't imagine that, including the people that win them. They often are, like, they're very happy, but it wasn't they're like, crown an idea. They often, like, focused on the topic, and then later it became very important, right? Like recently with the new vaccine technology, right? And but for the gurus, all that matters, like in science, is kind of Nobel, right? Like, so that's why they're not talking about making a contribution.
It's just a buzzword. It's just a buzzword, like paradigm and da 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 da. It's just it's one of their jargons that people can recognize and not really understand how it works within these actual academic fields. And boom, it lets them speak publicly in this confident way.
Well, the other thing I will point out, so there's another clip I have there that is JPP. This is Jordan Peterson talking about Elon Musk, right? And this is a guru talking about another guru.
Yeah,
right?
there we go.
But I think this is a good illustration of the level of, like, kind of narcissistic self-aggrandizing that goes on, even when it's projected onto, like, other figures that are seen on their side. So, yes, worth a listen.
And his ability to insert himself into these hidden systems is absolutely revolutionary. It's a mythological trope, an ancient mythological trope, that it's the evil brother of the rightful king who is one of the prime enemies of the state. It's the evil brother of the righteous king, and it's the goddess of chaos. Those are the 2 enemies. It's the social structure pathologized or the natural world rebelling. Right, so historic enemies. Well, the evil brother of the king is camouflage and corruption. And what happens as a system develops is that it accretes predators and parasites. That's a biological metaphor. And if the load gets too heavy, the system collapses. And the antidote to that, the Egyptians had figured this out, the ancient Egyptians. The antidote to that was clear, honest speech and careful attention. The Egyptians actually had a god who signified that. That was Horus, and he was the defeater, the eternal enemy of the evil king. And Musk is playing that role with his engineers. He's in there finding out, like, how much of government spending is wasted. Well, you don't know. Why do you not know? Well, because the government itself doesn't even have the internal mechanisms to track its own behavior.
Oh my God, it just jumps. This is very galaxy-brained, that's for sure.
Oh yeah.
As well as being, yes, extremely perfectly self-aggrandizement and narcissism right here. I think it illustrates that exactly, where you're basically calling Elon Musk Horus. And of course, Jordan Peterson being the lead priest to identify this.
Oh yes, and Jordan Peterson, actually, that particular clip, I think, is from a video where he compared the entire Trump administration, like Tulsi Gabbard, J.D. Vance, Trump himself, to the X-Men and other heroes and gods. Like each one of them had their own special characteristics, and his channel has like a little video, with them all in superhero costumes. And it's the kind of thing where when you say that, you're like, no, surely not. Like, somebody wouldn't do that. But yes, he did. And that's normal behavior in the guru sphere.
Okay, so next up is, I guess, grievance mongering. I think that this is an important one. It's one of the lessons that I use when talking to my followers, that as soon as somebody being canceled is good for you. And so grievance mongering is very much playing on cancel culture and the way its role in modern society is, in my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things is that it allows you to present yourself as like a victim, being targeted by others. So you can also prepare your audience. There's a Russell Brand clip that I'll play later that speaks to that. But like, you predict that you will be criticized and attacked, right? And then you are, because you are promoting conspiracy theories or, misrepresenting history or whatever the case might be. And then you say, look, I told you they would attack me, right? And
exactly. It inoculates. It's a form of vaccination even. You vaccinate your followers against the kind of critiques that'll come. Yeah, exactly.
So this is Robert Malone talking to Joe Rogan.
Right. So for me, the reason is because what's happening is not right. It's destroying my profession. It's destroying the practice of medicine worldwide. It's destroying public health in medicine. I'm a vaccinologist. I've spent 30 years developing vaccine, a stupid amount of education, learning how to do it and what the rules are. And for me, I'm personally offended by watching my discipline get destroyed for no good reason at all, except apparently financial incentives and I don't know, political ass covering.
Yep, that's definitely a perfect example of grievance mongering right there, inoculating people against the kind of critiques that's going to hit you, which are hitting him right now, of course.
Well, Robert Malone as well, so for your listeners, they may or may not know, but he claimed to be the inventor of RNA technology, right, for vaccines. That is not the case, right?
Talk about self-aggrandizement.
Yeah, he was involved in like one aspect of the technology back in the day, but like he basically represents it that he invented that technology almost single-handedly, right? And actually, if you listen to that Joe Rogan episode, he also claims to have invented a bunch of other technologies, and so it's not enough, right, to have just been involved in RNA. But so Robert Malone's story, and a lot of them, the same as the Weinstein brothers that we covered, it's them personally who have had, the revolutionary theories. Brett Weinstein believes that he has an alternative theory of evolution that's been overlooked. He also has a theory about telomeres and senescence, which means that all drugs in the US are unreliable, right? He also happens to be anti-vaccine. And most of them are also, selling kind of their own alternative system, be it ivermectin related or whatever the case might be, as the solution. So yes, grievance mongering is extremely common. And it pairs nicely with the next feature, which is about cultish dynamics. So there's a clip which is titled "The People versus Goliath." This is Brett Weinstein again talking to Tucker Carlson, and I think it highlights both grievance mongering and cultish dynamics quite well.
Okay, let's do it.
So I call the force that we're up against Goliath, just so I kind of remember what the battle is. Goliath made a terrible mistake, and it made it most egregiously during COVID, which is it took all of the competent people, took all of the courageous people, and it shoved them out of the institutions where they were hanging on. And it created, in so doing, the dream team. Created every player you could possibly want on your team to fight some historic battle against a terrible evil. All of those people are now at least somewhat awake. They've now been picked on by the same enemy. And yeah, all right, we're outgunned. It has a tremendous amount of power, but we've got all of the people who know how to think. So I hate to say it, or maybe I like to say it, but I don't think it's a slam dunk, but I like our odds.
I've never met a more fluent biologist, I have to say.
Yeah, I'd call that the people versus Goliath.
Yeah,
Wow.
Goliath is the name for his shadowy, entity, the globalists or whoever the case might be. But the kind of dynamic that he's highlighting there about like there being a group of good-hearted, clear-thinking, well-motivated people and an evil, corrupt, lying group of, sycophantic, suppressive forces. That is talking about the gurus, yes, but it also reflects onto their followers where obviously if you're supporting the good guys, you're part of this movement, for light, for justice, you're saving the world from the cabal of pedophiles, all these kind of things. So it's at once creating this very Manichaean world of like the good versus the bad and inviting people to be part of this heroic struggle against the forces of darkness. And all of those forces just happen to be the establishment, the institutions, whereas all the forces for good are the, renegades of MAGA in this case, as it would happen to be. So the people on the outside are always acting in bad faith. They're always motivated by the lowest motivations, and it just creates a very binary worldview of good people versus bad people, and the good people are their followers and them.
Yeah, and I see why you guys call this a constellation of traits. You can see how they develop from one into another, and there's so much overlap between them and how they're deployed, because this kind of grievance mongering that relates to anti-establishments, which relates to the creation of a cult around a self-aggrandizing figure, if you see what I mean. And so there's very much this kind of interrelationship between many of these various traits that sort of feed off one another.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there you heard there's obviously conspiracy mongering, right? In the
which is your next trait.
Yeah. But there is a clip which actually also kind of connects the three together. It's from Russell Brand, but it speaks to all of them.
And to see that transparency metastasized into something criminal that I absolutely deny makes me question, is there another agenda at play? Particularly when we've seen coordinated media attacks before, like with Joe Rogan when he dared to take a medicine that the mainstream media didn't approve of, and we saw a spate of headlines from media outlets across the world using the same language. I'm aware that you guys have been saying in the comments for a while, watch out Russell, they're coming for you, you're getting too close to the truth, Russell Brand did not kill himself. I know that a year ago there was a spate of articles, Russell Brand's a conspiracy theorist, Russell Brand's right wing. I'm aware of news media making phone calls, sending letters to people I know for ages and ages. It's been clear to me, or at least it feels to me like there's a serious and concerted agenda to control these kind of spaces and these kind of voices. And I mean my voice along with your voice.
It is not just a cultish dynamic, but it is also very clearly a conspiracy theory right here, where it's a conspiracy against these people, which is an establishment Goliath conspiracy, designed to take down their geniuses, if you will.
Yeah, and it can also be, one of the things is like, so there you can hear Brand like suggesting that, you know, what we talked about, inoculating the audience, because he's being accused of like serious sexual crimes, right? This is on getting out ahead of that and kind of saying, of course they're coming to attack me for that, right? It's not about the women like, you know, wanting justice for, or this kind of thing. It's about like vaccines and stuff, right? And also personalizing the attack, that by them criticizing me, they're trying to attack you, right? And that is very much a motif that you hear. And the other thing that you hear quite a lot of in this conspiracy mongering, so there is on occasion the effort to like conspiracy monger, but while doing it with the security that you're not directly saying that that's what you're saying. Right, it's like there's this, Joe Rogan and crew are experts in this regard. They can advance and talk about conspiracies, Graham Hancock as well, but they will then say, well, we didn't actually like endorse that. And if you look in the conspiracy mongering file,
we're just asking questions.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a beautiful exchange between Jordan Peterson and Brett Weinstein where they're discussing hospitals and medicine. Like, are they actually good for us?
I suspect if you did the statistics properly, I suspect that medicine, independent of public health, kills more people than it saves. I suspect if you factor in phenomena like the development of superbugs in hospitals, for example, that overall the net consequence of hospitals is negative. Now that's just a guess, but it could easily be wrong, but it also could not be wrong, and that is a good example, or that's where my thinking about what we don't know has taken me with regards to the critique of what we do.
The fact that it's even plausible is a stunning fact.
Well, you know, medical error is the third leading cause of death.
Yep.
You know, and that doesn't take into account the generation of superbugs, for example.
Oh my God, you have to be kidding me. That is the most enraging.
No, it could not.
It could be
not wrong.
It's just a guess. It's just a guess. Oh,
yeah. So that is, you know, this, like you said, these things overlap. So like the conspiracy mongering is often about like them being targeted by, you know, nefarious forces, and it's they'll make reference to like actual conspiracies that happen, you know, the Tuskegee syphilis experiments, for example, like governments have actually engaged in, you know, clandestine programs and stuff, all of which is true, none of which means that conspiracy theories are valid. One feature being that they're often uncovered by whistleblowers and investigative journalists, never by conspiracy theorists, right? But the other aspect of it is that they basically invoke from the reaction that there's something very, you know, incredible being communicated here. Like if Brett Weinstein isn't there and Jordan Peterson is sitting in a room with another person and he's like, maybe hospitals kill more people, they'd be like, what the hell are you talking about? You know, it's like, have you ever noticed sick people are often at hospitals? And you're like, yes, because that's what hospitals are.
Because that's my dad died in a hospital, but he was very sick and ill. Like, you know, and I mean, to argue that this stuff is not working, like all you need is the most basic statistics of the history of medicine to recognize that modern medicine is amazing. It is saving my life right now as we speak, and it is saving many other people's lives, and even the people's lives who are probably criticizing it right now. And it's just, I mean, so
it's worth considering though that like people like Jordan Peterson and Brett are often also like involved in promoting alternative medicine and like kind of anti-vaccine stuff, right? So Jordan Peterson rather famously was put into a self-induced coma, or medically induced coma, not self-induced, but in Russia, because his daughter convinced him to travel to Russia to like engage in an experimental treatment in order to get off addiction to the drugs that he was taking, anti-anxiety, or I forget, benzodiazepine or whatever it was. But so he presented that as well, that all of the medical authorities in Canada, in the US, they all misdiagnosed him. One of them diagnosed him as having schizophrenia, and all of it was like misdiagnosed. His daughter famously advocates, an all meat diet, talks about it being related to inflammation and so on. So he is somebody that, is very skeptical of medical authorities, and Brett Weinstein, one of the leading anti-vaccine advocates in America during the COVID pandemic. So they are these kind of people that undermine things like just belief in medical authorities. It's not just academics, it's anything around public health, any institution. So it's the same motif with the anti-establishment stuff, and it has the potential to be really harmful, especially during a global pandemic where it was very harmful.
Yeah, exactly. This is why this kind of anti-establishmentarianism has real impacts on real people, because they're not going to actually get the medical treatment that they need. And not just during a pandemic, but during ordinary medical crises that occur in the course of one's life. It could be just getting cancer or having an ill loved one. I cannot tell you the number of times when people have said you should take ivermectin for your cancer. And it's just like, or even worse, the number of times where everybody's like, you need to cut out all carbs. And it's like, man, I actually did some research on this. I talked with my doctors and I looked it up. The specific genetic mutation that my cancer has shows that a diet high in protein and fat would actually be bad for my cancer. Even though for some cancers, a diet where you cut out carbs and have mostly protein and fat, it could be good. There's a lot of research that still needs to be done. And that's part of the problem. This research is at its infancy in the relationship between diet and cancer. So we need to wait until we understand how it impacts your specific cancer, not just cancer in general. That's not how we do things.
Sound like someone that's been lied to by big pharma. That's it.
If I was lied to by big pharma,
they're trying to keep you alive, Flint?
Chris, if I was lied to by big pharma, I'd be dying right this second, because the prognosis for stage 4 melanoma is like 6 months to a year before new medicines came out, and the medicines are working very well for me. So I have every confidence that I'm not about to die within the next 6 months to a year.
That's great. I'm glad to hear it.
Pharma. So let's instill some trust.
Yeah, I have something that can maybe serve as a palate cleanser, because it's pretty dark territory that they're in, right? And this is often where conspiracy mongering goes. But the next feature around having revolutionary features, you already heard it kind of in the way that Brett and Eric Weinstein present themselves as having developed, Nobel Prize worthy ideas. It's not just that they're contributing to a field. You're a scientist doing work. That's not enough. You have to have an idea that will completely revolutionize a field if it's adopted. But the important
wait a second. It's not just paradigm shifting in one paradigm. It shifts all 70 paradigms at the same time.
Well, if adopted, it could. Eric Weinstein believes that he has developed a theory of everything that, if adopted, would allow us to travel to, other solar systems and become multi-planetary. The level of importance that we adopt their ideas cannot be overstated. Brett's idea would, one, allow evolutionary theory to develop. It's been stuck in a rut, as we all know. And then also that theory alone, that's a separate one about an alternative theory of evolution. But he also knows about all of the things in drug testing. That means that none of the drugs in the US are safe. So if we don't get that sorted, we're in big trouble.
Before you go to your clip, I do want to make one clear point. This idea that science and scholarship is stuck in a rut is far from the truth of how people in the fields believe this. If anything, the fields of Greek archaeology, environmental archaeology, they're moving faster than ever before, with the kind of different ways that we approach things, the new methods that we have, the number of excavations that are occurring. It's above and beyond. It's a period of a scientific renaissance in many ways for many fields. We're worried because of cuts that are happening in America and elsewhere that this period might end. But and there's certain systemic challenges that we have in higher education and science that also are headwinds on us. But overall, the amount of movement and progress that scientific fields are making right now is revolutionary for people within these fields.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I just seconded to point out that, like, if you listen to people like Peter Thiel or Eric Weinstein or various other like doom mongers, they often talk about like scientific progress as if it stopped in 1970s, right? We haven't really made, yes, we've made iPhones, but they're not really, you know, they're just incremental.
Notice how convenient it is that it always stopped from the last time they got their education.
Yes,
so you know, like when they're in high school and college, what they learned, that's what they think is the level of scientific advancement. They have no idea what we're actually doing today.
Well, there's a beautiful point about that, because there is a clip of Jordan Peterson. I don't think I have it there, but it is basically him talking about how all the, you know, all the usual thing, the institutions are corrupt, they're all terrible. Harvard in particular, because this was when the Trump administration is still attacking it, but he was involved with Harvard. So how does he square the circle about, right, Harvard is a corrupt institution? But of course, the answer is it wasn't corrupt when he was there. It's become corrupt since he left. So you're exactly right that like it was good, you know, in the past whenever they were involved, but it's become like corrupted since then.
And that might be a criterion you could add to for a 12th one is glorifying a mythological past.
Oh, yes.
I think they all do that in different ways. And I think that's also one of Umberto Eco's key points for fascism. And so I think there's a kind of relationship there that gurus are going to do. When times were better at Harvard, when it was just the elites like me, the right kind of elites.
That is a recurring motif, that there was like a golden age that we've left, right? And like Peter Thiel in particular, he tends to focus on, there was a time when people were seriously trying to reach immortality. Like, you know, that was a goal. And now people have given up on that.
There was a time they were trying to make gold out of copper too.
Yes. So this, but like you said, I just had the same reaction that, like, you know, in any field you look in, like, you know, phylogenetic analysis, mRNA vaccines, the proton beam therapy, just there's been tons of projects. AIs, right? AIs currently, it's revolutionary. It's made a big difference to the way I do research and various things. And all of that is happening, you know, in the contemporary period. But in any case, yes, the image of stagnation is not true, but it is very convenient if you want to present yourself as somebody that, you know, has the ideas that, and if they were adopted, everything would get better, right? But for that,
I have revolutionary ideas too. They're just, I forget them when I wake up.
Yeah, that's the problem. Well, so a palate cleanser of sorts. If you look at the revolutionary theories, there is one called CL, Cognitive Theoretic Model of the Universe. This is Chris Langan, the self-proclaimed highest IQ individual in the planet, possibly, but at least in America, outlining his revolutionary theory.
Reading Bertrand Russell and Albert Einstein, and it occurred to me, these two things really need to be put together. And then, you know, once I decided that, I started putting them together. And then I found out about Kurt Gödel and the undecidability theorem. And yes, absolutely. Okay, you see, because reality isn't just geometric, which is what Einstein thought it was, nor is it just linguistic. It's a blend of the two, right? Russell saw it as being linguistic. Einstein saw it as being geometric. Okay, so I decided that reality must be logico-geometric, putting the two of them together. And of course, then I realized, well, I've got to put together a theory, construct a theory in which reality is actually logico-geometric. And so that's where the CTMU came from. And the
CTMU is the cognitive theoretic model of the universe.
Cognitive theoretic model of the universe.
This is your theory of everything.
My theory of everything, and it's all in the name. If you take a good close look at that, you've got cognitive theory, and of course, you know, a theory is a kind of language, theoretic language, okay? And then you've got cognitive theoretic model, you've got a model, and then you've got universe. You've got a language, you've got a universe, and then the model is the mapping between them. CTMU says those are all the same thing. All of those terms, all of those properties are distributed everywhere over reality. Reality can have only one structure once you realize that and you implement it in theoretical form.
I think what I love most about this clip is that your file name includes the word remarkably stupid.
Yeah, that's editorializing from me. Yes.
Because this linguistic geometric mashup, oh my God, my brain just hurts. It's so stupid.
Yeah. And again, from a self-proclaimed highest IQ individual, who goes on to explain that, like, this is also linked into evidence that God exists, the afterlife exists, aliens have been visiting the US, and like the government's controlled by, if you follow his online stuff, it tends to be Jews, aliens, and a lot of racism, a lot of strong racism. He's
Wait,
like,
who is this guy again? Who is it?
Chris Langan. Chris Langan. He actually featured in a Malcolm Gladwell book as a like high IQ individual. So he's
by combining geometry and language to create a model of the universe.
yes. So like a lot of this is based around like the belief that the people themselves has incredible insights, and they are revolutionary thinkers, the likes of with the world has never seen, and they will often directly compare themselves in a way that's extremely on the nose to Galileo. It's like they haven't heard of that many. So there's an actual, Galileo gambit, but that is who they often reference themselves as being, similar to. And similarly will present it that they're persecuted for their ideas. So,
which, by the way, Galileo was not persecuted by the scientific establishment. He was persecuted by the fucking church. Like, it's the complete opposite.
That was an institution, wasn't it, Flint?
Yeah. But the point being that, like, they're talking about being persecuted as scientists by their own institutions. That's the opposite of what Galileo was persecuted by. He was persecuted by something very different. These individuals chose to disassociate themselves from higher education and academia. So, it's a different scenario. It's an inapplicable analogy.
you might say that, but I'm, it's who can say? So their theories are revolutionary, but they've been suppressed. It falls in with all the other things that we've talked about. And there's an example where actually what the gurus often do as well, interesting, Flint, is like, while they're good at like invoking conspiracies and stuff, they're also actually often directly stating, what they think, their persecution complexes and stuff. And there's a last clip in this kind of area that I think is worth playing. This is Eric and Brett talking again, but a good self-diagnosis of their psychology.
I think you and I share a certain delight when we do our homework and we discover something interesting and absolutely nobody else gets it.
Mm-hmm.
That would feel bad to most people because they would feel like, what am I doing wrong? Why does nobody else understand this point? To you and me, that feels good. It is to know that you have achieved something, you have discovered something, and that nobody else can even recognize it, gives you some sort of sense of how far ahead you might be.
What is the point of discovering something that nobody else can recognize? Like, what the hell? That's like the opposite of what discovering something is. The point of discovering something is to be able to share your discovery with others.
Well, in their case, they will be vindicated. You will be presented, just like Graham. Eventually, Flint, when the evidence emerges, you'll be discredited and they will be seen as revolutionary geniuses who were ahead of their time. So that's it. But just that comparison of like, when everyone is telling you that you're wrong, for other people, when they're saying all the evidence doesn't support your claims, for other people, that might make them question, like, am I potentially wrong? But in their case, it's just evidence of how far ahead of everyone else they are. So, that's to me was a very revealing clip.
And it also, again, ties in very well to how they both inoculate themselves and build themselves up and tear down other groups and institutions. It's this trifecta of doing those three things constantly in many of these different criteria all at once. Yeah.
Yes. And so there's The next characteristic is like the Cassandra complex, and this is like that they are able to predict the future. They're warning people about impending doom. This kind of is a good partner to what you talked about, that there is a golden age in the past. It's like now we're living in Mappa, the end times. And very often, the dark forces are there. They're ready to destroy society, but there's a brave gang of defenders. And the only hope is if we can deal with big archaeology or Anthony Fauci or whoever it is. And again, when we originally made this, Matt was talking about it because, he was saying they fit the kind of Cassandra archetype quite well. And then, as often happens, the gurus themselves went on to directly compare themselves to Cassandra. So there's a clip with Brett Weinstein and Jordan Peterson, with Jordan Peterson talking about how he relates to Cassandra.
Here we go.
So maybe not, but I have some of the abilities of Cassandra. Cassandra was a seer who was fated to be entirely accurate in her predictions. Her torture was that no one ever listened to her. So I don't have that problem because people do listen to me, but I do have some ability to see down the road to where things are going. I mean, I'm optimistic fundamentally. I certainly do believe that as a species, we're on the cusp of a potential prosperity and realm of possibility that's unparalleled.
Talk about right nail on the head, right?
Yeah. So I was very pleased with it.
I know. I can imagine you calling up Matt and being like, "Guess what I just found."
Yeah, and it's so it is always there is a nefarious group. It ties in with the conspiracies, but in that case as well, Jordan Peterson. The whole point of Cassandra, as far as I understand the myth and legend, is like she had the ability to see the future, but also the curse that like nobody would heed the prophecies, right? But Jordan Peterson compares herself to Cassandra, but then it's like, but everybody listens to me, so he has all of the abilities, but none of the flaws. So it's just incredible that like we heard him compare Elon Musk to an Egyptian god. Here he is compared to a mythical figure, and they're referencing Goliath and Galileo, and it's always like that, and it speaks to like the self-aggrandizing nature. Like this is why I'm skeptical about using their techniques against them.
Well, we'll talk about this. Even this one, I think, has its uses. But I do think that I do think you guys need a 12th thing about building myth in some way. And I think it also actually debunks your term secular gurus, because I think they incorporate a lot of myth and spirituality, especially in the jargon and languages and analogies that they make.
I've got a beautiful illustration of that, and that relates to their tendency towards neologisms and sort of profound bullshit, which is the next characteristic. And in that case, like the one that in many respects, Eric Weinstein is the prototypical like secular guru, right? And he has coined, for example, the distributed idea suppression complex, the DISC, the gated institutional narrative, the GIN, right? The DISC protects the GIN. This is all things that people like. And if you remember the fellow Jordan Hall, who was spinning the 90 paradigms.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a conversation he was having with David Fuller, a journalist for Rebel Wisdom, a kind of alternative media channel. If you play that clip, you will hear exactly what you're talking about, like the love for metaphor and analogy and kind of jumping between topics with linguistic fluency.
There was a thing that had a vital essence to it that eventually showed up as gatekeeper, and probably many other things. Curator's probably a subset or a sub-species of the same higher order thing. Many of which became corrupt, of course, and became exploited and gamed and whatnot, as they tend to. The inquiry of, okay, what is this new thing? How do we go back up into the most vital center and then come back down? Can't be gatekeeping. That implies things like gates. And of course, gates are around territories. And territories tend to be civilization, cities, castles, protected things. But boundaries, different idea, right? A boundary is a different idea than a gate. A gate has a strong enclosure that has only one specific opening, very narrow, very well guarded. And then there's some very simple process that allows things to come and go, right? A cell membrane is very different. Maybe that's a better metaphor. What does it mean to actually build a boundary, a membrane that has the ability to selectively bring in the resources that are necessary and appropriate for the vital health of the interior while keeping the toxic components out and recognizing that we are no longer individuals?
That is insane in the membrane.
Can you, Flint, I have a question for you. I think it would be hard in general, right? But can you guess what he's talking about there? Like, you don't have the context for the conversation. So, like, what's this in reference to? What would you just hazard a guess?
Well, it sounds like what he's trying to do is justify gatekeeping on his side to some degree. So what would that be about? Like, you mean like a specific, like news event is what you're saying?
Oh, no. That's not bad. That's not bad, actually, because he just is waffling through different metaphors. But what that conversation is actually about is conversation about conversations, which is a very common thing in the alternative media space.
Conversation about conversations.
And it happens to be a conversation that he had with an avowed neo-Nazi, anti-Semitic guy. And the journalist is kind of criticizing him for having that conversation without warning his audience about the anti-Semitic nature of the guy that he was talking to. And part of this conversation is, well, how to have a conversation with a neo-Nazi and like take in the positive but leave out the bad bits, a cell membrane, a gate. Should we talk about a castle? And I feel like the emphasis is on the analogy as opposed to the basic issue,
substance.
which, which is like, is it good to be platforming strongly?
So his point is, no, it's fine because I didn't want to gatekeep a neo-Nazi. I wanted to cell membrane them.
Yes, although he also does wax poetic about like creating a third entity in the conversation, like a kind of union, like a slug, the way they meet. So it's your point about like mythical language and religious and spiritual, but it's often around the most mundane things. And I do take the point that they often reference like spirituality and religion and the insights from, Lao Tzu or whoever, right? Like these kind of historical figures. But I think the other clip is a good illustration of like the more common variety that it takes.
Now, if you ask me what's going on with geometric unity, I can say something very simply that because you have a very large viewership, will go out to many people. You won't understand it, but it'll be over very quickly, and it should be an astounding comment. If you take a Lorentzian metric as a section of a bundle of pointwise Lorentz metrics and pull back the positive Weyl spinners with suitable passing to maximal compact subgroup, you get one generation of Petit Salam grand unified fermions. Now, that was very quick, but what it really just said is that general relativity knows the standard model. Anybody of Schwann's ability should be able to parse that 20-second sojourn and say, is that something we know? Is that something that might be interesting? Then what we'll have is we'll have the typical physicist large language model conversation in which physicists will ask, do you have a new prediction at anything at electroweak scale? Which is a question that doesn't get asked to the string theorists.
Oh my God. This reminds me of Graham Hancock's pyramid math, which I demonstrated to Rogan quite clearly could be used for any numbers. It's just dazzling with technobabble.
Yes. And in Eric's case, there actually is like at least a semblance that he knows, what the concepts mean, like to a certain extent under it. But the whole point of that, like you said, is it's performative, right? Like it's like the difference between referencing a scholar whose idea you want to acknowledge because it's relevant to the topic versus dropping in lots of like, obscure references and linguist or literature references so that you can show that you're a well-read Renaissance man or whatever the case might be. So that's the difference. And I think that like with Jordan Peterson and stuff, he's a deeply, deeply religious man, but he also will constantly invoke Jungian interpretations and psychological, and it's very much like, it's less on like revealed truth as more like revealed truth via modern insights from science, from evolutionary biology, from archaeology, this kind of thing. But you're all right that they will often make reference as well to ayahuasca trips or insights gleaned from, introspective practices or so on. So there isn't like a completely hard line that they won't reference.
I mean, I agree with you that they are secular by and large, though there is this shift towards Christianity lately.
Yes.
But they are secular, especially in their foundations. But I think that, there's the way they glorify the past and the way they dabble in these spiritual and mythological tropes is something there that I think could use some more thought even from my perspective as a historian. It's something that I notice a lot with their
just when you mentioned it, I could put a folder with 50 clips of people.
Woohoo! Let's do an episode on your podcast where we'll introduce the new criterion. That'll be a fun one.
It is a recurring motif, even like figures like Nassim Taleb, who are in other respects but they still harken back to the people in the past knew things, and the same way when you'll often hear, even though there is like an ethnocentrism to things, when they're referencing, Native Americans or people from non-Western cultures, it often is a kind of idealized, Orientalist presentation that there is like ancient knowledge, or they were at one with nature, whereas, in the West, we've lost that insight. So it's the like healing the ills of Western civilization model. Like Jordan Peterson has an interest in Indigenous Canadian populations, but it's very much around, that kind of idealized presentation of them as a cure for Western ills.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think in that sense, of course, it blends very nicely into number 10, which is excessive profiteering. And as we've seen, especially with the wellness industry, the cures for modern ills, that is what they're going for, whether it's just listening to their mantra or whether they're actually selling pills as actual cures for modern ails.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you get a lot of supplement shilling amongst these people. And there are cases where people don't need to do it, like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk are billionaires, right? You won't hear them supplementing, selling supplements directly because they make money in other ways, right? But the majority of them are willing to do that, and they are willing to do things like on Patreon, for example, charge £212 for a monthly hangout. Brett Weinstein does that, and there's ways that all content creators and whatnot are engaged in some ways, and building communities, and people, including academics, including public intellectuals, are selling books, promoting ideas. They might have merchandise for different things, not academics usually, but people that are online creators often do, and there's no issue with that. The reason we called it excessive profiteering is because it's like a level of profiteering which is beyond the ordinary. I would put in this, I don't think in many respects that Steven Pinker fits the template of a secular guru very well. I think he more is like a public intellectual figure. But an example of excessive profiteering would be when he minted an NFT of his belief in free speech and then sold it for like $1,000, which came with like a Skype call to him. That would be excessive profiteering. So it's that kind of thing where you're like, is that something that normally you would think? And Jordan Peterson, he has business branded courses after him. He now has a online Peterson alternative to the university. They often have these like alternative institutions or courses or whatnot, and they're often highly exploitative in the marketing and promotion of it. So it's all based on cultivate the power of social relationship and exploit it for maximum profit. And there are plenty of content creators that do that ethically, and they have of course parasocial relationships are sort of inevitable in the modern ecosystem. We have a Patreon, we have people that support us, but there's a way that you can do that which is not like exploitative and kind
Let's
of
get there in a
people's
second.
fear.
That's where we can talk about, I think, how to learn from these some of them, not all of them, in an ethical sort of way. Yeah.
I have a nice little clip that speaks to this, the kind of distinction that I think you will not hear Flint Dibble doing. I hope not at any point. So the one clip that said excessive profiteering is a good illustration.
I own a very comical book, The Collected Poems of Donald J. Trump, available for purchase at the Daily Wire website, by the way, which compiles his most memorable tweets and declarations from 2009 to 2019 into beautiful library edition hardback form. It is a ridiculously funny tome. I believe that deeper consideration of this proclivity for the viciously funny is also useful in shedding more general light on Trump's admittedly complex personality. First, we should fairly note that dictatorial types, a category which his enemies insist he falls into, are generally not known for their sense of humor. People were imprisoned in the Stalinist Soviet Union for being the first to stop applauding after a speech by the great leader. Criticism was absolutely out of the question, and certainly not forthcoming from the top. I've also never encountered a compendium of the witty and amusing things said by Adolf Hitler or Fidel Castro or Chairman Mao. Trump.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
So to be clear, he's selling a book of leather-bound book of Donald Trump's tweets.
Oh my God. Oh my God. I've learned so much. Like, for one, I actually did not realize that many of these gurus were actually so strongly supportive of Trump and MAGA.
Oh, yes.
I actually did not know that, to be honest, because I don't follow them so closely. I follow the pseudo-archaeology ones, which some of them are and some of them aren't. Most of them are, but not all of them. And yeah, that is just selling out. It's just selling out 100% into this thing to profit off of the lowest effort possible of just getting a few tweets and printing them in a book. Like, I have to give him some credit, though. He's very consistent in his ability to tie all these things together. One sentence he's profiteering, in the next he's promoting dear leader, in the third he's promoting himself, in the fourth he's criticizing leftists. And so it's just like all within one little 1 minute bit, he's able to do all this stuff all in one bit. It's just so
that is
impressive.
true. There is skill involved, and there is a reason that a lot of these people are so popular, right? Because this is part of what makes them interesting to us. Is like they are very skilled in like the Taken quote. They have a very particular set of skills, and they make themselves terrible for people like us. But it is a set of skills nonetheless. And
and they're good at it, and they know how to keep their eye on the bottom line. Like Hancock, one of the things I'm impressed with him on, he goes on Rogan all the time, and no matter what Joe asks him early on, he's very quick at them promoting his book that just came out. He knows how to immediately turn it, because he knows that most people are seeing the first 5 minutes and then they might tune out. So you want to get that plug in right away. So he knows to do that. He's the businessman, and he's a good one at it.
Well, there's a skill to doing that naturally, because I've seen people go on Rogan and attempt to do that, and it comes across very badly, right?
He does it in a way that comes across very naturally, very innocently. He's very good at it. And all of these, I'd say the top level gurus, they're very good at what they do. And of course, a lot of it is designed towards profiteering, because they need to, as you put it, exploit parasocial relationships very clearly and sell their stuff. And to do this, of course, you just added a new one: moral grandstanding. So you are still updating your things. Explain moral grandstanding to me.
Well, so moral grandstanding is like a concept that philosophers were talking about. There's a reference there to Tosi and Wormke's book, but it is basically where like moral language is used and a pose of like high moral virtue, but it is primarily used for self-aggrandizing, right? A holier than thou is probably the way that you would present it, but it basically comes in the form around the gurus that they're always motivated by the highest good, right? Like they're concerned with totalitarianism. They're trying to like promote world peace. They want to, you know, enlighten the people that have been cast aside by academics and looked down upon by the elites in society. They're always doing things for the highest motives, and that means that their criticisms and attacks at them are like attacking a good man, right? Like somebody who's trying to do good for people. And, you know, all of the clips that I've played, like, they're all from men, right? There are women. We have covered women. But I will say that this is very strongly gendered in the favor of men. I don't know if it's good for men. It's not. I would say not. But it does tend to be like male dominated, this space. And I think that is no, you know, just happenstance. It's probably part of the characteristics and the like the kind of politics that often get promoted around here. But yes, so in any case, there's a thing that we've also talked about, like the wounded bird pose, where you will have people like Lex Friedman talking about how, you know, he's going to be attacked. People know his heart. He loves everyone. He'll often speak about how much he loves everyone. And yes, that in attacking him, they're really attacking the chance for world peace. So if you want to hear an example of that, the one called Maximum Martyrdom is a good illustration. This is following on the back of his conversation with Zelensky about Putin.
Even if the heart boils over with hate, leadership now requires sitting at the negotiation table and compromising. This may be painful, but it is necessary. There are a few other places in the conversation where some online mobs took my words out of context and used them to call me naive and to call for more war, saying peace is impossible with a man who they claim is the second coming of Hitler. My friends, if you make such attacks on this conversation, it is in fact you who are naive and ignorant of the facts of history and geopolitics. Peace must be made now, in order for death and suffering to stop, in order for Ukraine to have a chance to flourish, and in order for the drums of a global war to stop beating. A global war that would cripple humanity. This was my goal. Once again, to push for peace. And I will continue this effort to the best of my ability. Thank you. I love you all.
Oh my God, Lex. Oh my God. This is a topic that's near and dear to me because I actually spent 3 summers working in the Crimean Peninsula when I was like about 20 years ago. And so I understand the situation in Ukraine and Russia very well because there were tensions then already, especially in the Crimea, where a lot of Russian-speaking people were living, but also a lot of Tatars and a lot of Ukrainian-speaking people were living. And so it was such an ethnic mishmash, and there's tensions there with that. And so, for example, one of my good friends, the archaeologist Anton Smirnov, he passed away in the war. He volunteered to fight. He was my age, and he fought, I guess, for about a year on the Ukrainian side until he died in combat. And so it's something that's near and dear to me, and it's something that, as you know, I've had words with Lex online, where he does not show any love towards me at all. He invited me on his show, and then he ghosted me. We set something up, and then he just ignored me for 6 months. I asked him for 2 updates. He ignored me. And then the next thing I know, he has Graham Hancock on the day before Ancient Apocalypse Season 2 comes out, where they spend significant time bashing me. There's a whole segment just bashing me. And he sets up Hancock to do that. And then no response from Lex. And then I called him out on this on Twitter. And he's like, you should do better, Flint. And it's just yeah.
That's tough love, Flint. That's tough
well,
love.
I thought it was funny. He wrote this really long thing to me. We'll put it up on screen. And I replied, and I was like, this is not true because of XYZ. And his response was to immediately delete and block me. And it's like, that's not tough love. That's just, I'm going to insulate myself from valid critique.
Oh, well, I wasn't going to say it, but I think it's worth playing. You see the other clip that's in that box, the Lex Friedman one? So this is Lex responding to critiques he received about the way that he interviewed Zelensky and the bias he showed to Putin. But I think it's interesting to hear the way he frames it.
But online, on the interwebs, I saw a lot of attacks, sometimes from swarms of online accounts, which of course makes me suspicious about the origin of those attacks. One of my friends in Ukraine, who, by the way, thinks the attacks are all propped up by Ukrainian bot farms, said there's no need to say anything extra. Let the interview stand on its own. Just keep focused on the mission of pushing for peace. Basically, he's a Ukrainian version of my other friend, Joe Rogan, who to this day says, don't read the comments. This is generally good advice, and I try to follow it. But I'm also a human being. I wear my heart on my sleeve, and this interview, this war, for me, is deeply personal. And the level of vitriol, misrepresentation, and lies about the conversation and about me personally was particularly intense and disingenuous. So I thought I would use this opportunity to say a few words, just speak a bit more about how I approached this conversation with President Zelensky and conversations in general.
Yeah, you mean you approached it by speaking Russian when you could have spoke English with him, which is just deeply insulting.
Yes, after publicly requesting that, right? Not privately requesting that. And I mean, one of the aspects that I just wanted to mention was Lex was criticized by identifiable Ukrainians,
of course,
and Russians, right? Like Garry Kasparov and various people, Ukrainian activists who are identifiable. But in Lex's framing, it's Ukrainian bot farms, which I've never even heard of. Ukraine. Like the bot farms are in Russia. That's Russia.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if there's Ukrainian bot farms, but at the same time, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about identifiable, real Ukrainians who criticize this situation and his handling of it, which was, like I said, from my understanding of politics in Ukraine and Russia, which I have familiarity with to some degree, he handled that in an extremely insulting and biased way that was very obvious to anyone who understands the situation there.
Yes, but it's always presented, and the same with his interactions with you, that it's because he's trying to do things right. He's motivated by good things, and when you present any counter narrative to that, it reveals that you're like a bad faith actor, right? Who's only interested in self promotion or this kind of thing, right? So it's like a very clear double standard, and I mean, there's much worse examples of moral grandstanding, but Lex is a repeat offender in this domain. So that's it. And it kind of couples well with the notion that your enemies are bad, they're evil, they're the dark forces. So any attack on you is an attack on good people everywhere and your audience. Convenient.
I think that makes sense. All right, well, let's look at a couple of these charts from gurus that you've decoded before we move on to maybe thinking about what we could learn from them. So Eric Weinstein seems to be someone who shows all of these traits in a very strong way, with the exception of profiteering, which he shows in a strong enough way to profit from it, but not in like such a crass profiteering sort of way.
Yes, I mean he did sell like supplements and whatnot when he had a podcast, but the point is that he stopped doing his podcast for some reason. He did work for Peter Thiel as like managing director of one of his investment companies, so I don't think he's hurting for money, but it's the fact that he kind of stopped profiteering from a very popular podcast, which made him unusual in that respect.
Yeah, and maybe not doing it as such a crass, obvious way as selling a book of Donald Trump's tweets or constantly pawning supplements, that kind of thing.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
But everything else,
yes.
I will say with Jordan Peterson as well there, although he looks slower, we've since rescored him for the most recent year, because this was a conversation I think he did in 2018, or was the one that we originally looked at, and we take the score from the content that we looked at, right? Yeah. So he was less then than he is now, but I mean, he still is up at the tippy top, right? Like, so now he's up with Eric. He's up. I think he's even actually higher than Eric. He's now transcended. But at that time, he was still, this is still a very respectful scoring.
Yeah, that it is. And then we have Joe Rogan here at some point, a different version of this kind of meme. But yeah, He's obviously very much a guru on a lot of these things.
Yes, surprisingly so, because I think a lot of people don't think of Joe Rogan himself as like a guru figure, right? They see him as a conduit for others. But if you listen to Joe's content, like in long form, he has very clear ideas.
Oh yeah,
right?
I hope my
Like,
last video on Joe Rogan makes that point, that he has his ideas that he promotes, and he chooses to promote them rather than just being a conduit for others.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And this treatment of you and Graham Hancock highlights, right, like the difference, right, in treatment, the ideas that he wants to spread. But in all the things like conspiracy theorizing, self-aggrandizing, all these kind of things, like Joe has them in spades. So yeah, he is high, and I think deservedly so.
I agree, fully agree. And then of course we talked earlier about Gwyneth Paltrow, one of the few women in this space.
Yes. So she doesn't like, because she is more in the health and wellness space. She scores high in a couple of areas, right? But I think she is more prototypical for people that are active in like health and wellness and alternative medicine spaces. But there is overlap with like the modern guru template, but that's why she doesn't score as highly, I think.
I think that makes sense. I think that makes sense. So to go into someone like Carl Sagan, so here you have him as high on galaxy-brainness, which is obviously because he talks on a lot of different topics confidently. And then you have him at a 2 on Cassandra complex. I'm guessing that's just because he warns about issues that are going on in the world in the future.
He was doing that at the time. So this was in the content we looked at, which was like this specific speech that he gave. And
okay,
he wasn't like, it's at 2, right? Like the Cassandra complex for a reason. Like he was, I believe he was talking about like kind of impending doom and whatnot, but in a reasonable way, you know, like it was related to things, but it did have like just an element of that kind of ability to see things that others can't. But yes, it was about things which are much more reasonable to be concerned about, to be fair.
Yeah, and that's actually what I think is the important thing to realize, at least in my mind. If we go back to your 11 traits, part of my argument would be that some of these, taken in a moderate way, are actually a positive for trying to do education, particularly in the internet sphere. Because part of the problem is if you haven't noticed, Chris, as an academic yourself, it's hard for educators and scholars and scientists to actually get their point across in the public internet sphere. We're not very good at dealing with algorithms. We're not very good at recognizing how podcasters and the media are going to clip us out of context. We're not very good at building parasocial relationships, at least most of us are not. We're very much shut out and locked out of public discourse, is at least one of my big grievances, let's say, is that higher education as a whole, the point of view of most of my colleagues, I'm assuming across disciplines even, is fairly much absent from public discourse. And very often we are portrayed in a very straw man, straw woman sort of way, where what actually is going on in higher education is not accurately represented by others in the media and social media. And I think that's a problem. I think that builds strong anti-intellectual and anti-science sentiment across the world. And so one of my main goals of starting a YouTube channel or even going on Joe Rogan was to try to represent fairly, hopefully, the point of view of higher education and of scholarship and of stuff like that in a nuanced and ethical way, but one that could hopefully be heard. And I assume you guys, in the success of your podcast, that should hopefully be one of your goals as well.
Yeah. So the thing that I would say though there is, like, I agree with almost everything that you presented, probably all of it, to be honest, about, like, you know, the dangers of not being involved in online conversations and misrepresentations of academia that are very prevalent, right, and need to be countered. I think, though, my concern is that I agree that academics that want to make that effort should be supported and encouraged to do so, right? But there are plenty of people in academia who aren't really, you know, that way inclined. They're not likely to be great public speakers. They might be great researchers and whatnot. And that's fine. I think that's fine. I don't think everybody has to be a science communicator, but
I would never say that either. Yeah.
Yeah. So in some respect, like, I think it is good if we get more support for that outlet and like get it recognized as an important thing for people to do, but not like in a one size fits all things. And then the other thing is, I'm very acutely aware, in part because of the replication crisis and my interest in open science and that kind of thing, that the presenting of academic ideas in a palatable format, in a like way that is digestible and appealing to mass audiences, can lead to TEDification of ideas, right?
And lead to what?
TED Talks.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Where ideas are presented in that kind of bombastic way that this is revolutionary. Every academic idea is kind of parceled up as this, personal story and all these kind of things. And people did that, and it worked, and it was very gripping, but it also led to things like power posing becoming the most popular psychology talk, when the evidence base for power posing sucks. And when I think of people like Milo Rossi or CoffeeZilla, or those YouTubers that are doing critical investigations and doing it well and engagingly, or in your content as well, it makes it clear to me that you can do that, but you don't have to. For me, there's the kind of slippery aspect of like the dangers of TED or that.
So let's go through this. Let's go through this list, because actually there's some that I would get rid of immediately. Revolutionary theories is one of them. In fact, when I go and I talk at universities about public engagement, what I try to convince my colleagues to do is don't engage the public with your research content, engage them with your teaching content. Because as soon as you start doing the research content, it's embedded in this discourse, and it's very difficult. It's at the cutting edge of the field, so it's building upon centuries of knowledge that is difficult to communicate across. B, you're going to come off as a little bit too much of a revolutionary. It might not be stuff that's consensus anyway, like you said, the power pose and stuff like that. So you're trying to frame your own research as consensus when that's not quite been decided yet. So instead, what I try to argue when we communicate with the public is we should be communicating our teaching content, the material that is what we teach in our introductory university level courses, right? So I would actually say revolutionary theories, get rid of that when you're communicating with the public, because I think it creates that TEDification that you're talking about. I would certainly say we need to get rid of anti-establishment sentiments. As we see, I think we both agree that's the most dangerous. I think we need to acknowledge the challenges and issues with higher education and scholarship and whatnot. So maybe we'll be at a 2 there, because we might sometimes want to talk about the replication crisis or issues with publication and shit like that. But I think in general, we're trying to promote these institutions and education and scholarship. And then at the same time, but some of these other ones, so some of them, I think if we want to cut through the noise, we need to embrace a little bit of clickbait and drama. Drama and personal connection is what builds a parasocial relationship, after all. And having been engaged in a lot of drama, I've seen that the drama is what gets clicks and gets people paying attention to you. And so the question is how to walk that line, how to have that kind of your personality present, how to have a little bit of drama and saying, hey, academics are being canceled because we are, after all, but without playing that too heavily, that cancel culture and grievance mongering and self-aggrandizement. But I would say there needs to be a little bit there. If you look at social media influencers, they're all a little bit narcissistic. You're tweeting your opinions on Lex nonstop and they go viral. And, that's just life on social media. We're all going to be at least a little bit narcissistic if we're going to break through the noise, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. So I think the thing that I would say to that is, like, of course, you're right that, like, there's a particular style with like YouTube thumbnails or whatever that like will get more engagement and you can make like a really good video that is full of like great information on the topic, and it just get lost in the sea because you didn't want to like make a thumbnail that would be more gripping for the algorithm. That I think is a genuine thing that you have to like consider, right? Like if your goal is to reach more people, and it doesn't mean like selling out to do it, right? Like it's just simply engaging with the ecosystem that exists rather than like the version that you would ideally like in your head. But with that said, I do think that the danger with like leaning into that in any shape or form is very high, because I've seen a lot of people get worse, and also seeing content where I think there is higher engagement because it has those aspects of drama, and it has like very strong polemical content in it, right? And that drives engagement. But I personally think that undermines the level, and depending on the personality, can actually lead the person towards more of this archetype where it becomes about the individual and the, you know, like the person personified rather than the field. So like I
Well,
think
yeah, I think that's where we need to divorce ourselves from actually, like, I don't believe this drama. I see it as a show. You know, like the drama I have with Joe Rogan. Like, I've met Joe. I don't take anything he says personally because he is an entertainer. He knows what he's doing to be an entertainer. I've met him behind the scenes. That was part of the goal of that video there, was to show that he is putting on a show about what he wants to portray for the audience. So I don't take any of that drama seriously. But what I do is I use it to try to get attention in a knowledgeable way. I'm using it to draw attention, just like I mentioned to you off camera that I'm producing a documentary video about how science biohacked my cancer. And so the idea there is to bring in this personal story, because that's a great way to tell a story, but to make sure that my goal there is to promote real science and real medicine, right? And then to put in a fundraiser for the cancer hospital that I use and stuff like that, you know? So I think that personal stories, we need to recognize that they draw, but we cannot get too wrapped into them ourselves. We have to recognize that they're a tool, not reality. This is showbiz.
Yeah, so there's a fine line, and I think like one point that I'll completely concede is like, you know, I have no issue like just by my personality type as well, but like personally think it would be better if people are braver about, you know, like stating their opinions and being willing to argue for them and whatever. I'm not saying everybody has to become like a debate bro, but I state my opinions about academic stuff the same way I do on the podcast, right? And I don't mind doing that directly, being critical. And the general position I take is like, if people are making these, you know, content or material and it's out in public and there's thousands of people reacting to it and fawning over it or talking about how you're a great god or whatever, it's fine to come out and be critical of it, right? If you think it warrants it. So I wouldn't be like policing people in terms of like, you know, if they're going really harshly at people or whatever. You know, to each their own, the way that they respond to things. And the same thing in terms of like the amount that you share about your personal life or whatever, that is all down to the individual and, you know, their like personal comfort.
Exactly. But I think that these are tools to build drama, whether it's being strongly and attacking like Professor Dave Explains does, or whether it's being personal like I try to do, or, you know, I think to any time you're building a parasocial relationship, you're trying to share some level of your emotional connection with your audience. And so there's different ways to do that. There's no one size fits all. It's going to be different for different people. But people that are successful at communicating on the internet, what they are successful at doing is bringing some of their emotion to it.
Can I give an example, Flint, that would like give me pause for instance, right? Like, so I really like CoffeeZilla, right? I don't know if you're familiar with his content, but he covers like crypto. Yeah. He covers cryptocurrencies and, you know, financial frauds, and he's done great investigations with it. He's got a very popular channel, and he's currently being sued by Logan Paul for a thing that he did about like one of his promotion of NFTs, right? Now, CoffeeZilla, we've had him on. I like him. Very recently, he's been covering the Epstein controversy, and he has a main channel and he has a second channel where he normally was putting out videos like once or twice a month, right? Mainly additional interviews about his like investigations that he was doing and this kind of thing, getting very good views, you know, hundreds of thousands of views, sometimes over a million, but mostly in the hundreds of thousands. Whereas main channel, you know, gets more because it's big in-depth investigations. But he made an informal secondary channel. However, with the Epstein stuff, he's released, I think, 8 or 9 videos now in the space of about a week, and they all are getting 1 to 2 million views. And the content in those videos is much more like reacting to the news. And to me, it's engaging in the kind of conspiratorial like rhetoric around, you know, anomaly hunting in videos. And I agree with giving the Trump administration a black eye, right? Like, I've no desire to like defend Donald Trump or I don't have an issue with pointing out the hypocrisy of the conspiracy theorists who are now in his orbit and like trying to say there's nothing to see there, right? But in CoffeeZilla's content, to me, it's clear that he's doing things that are, I would notice, from 9/11 conspiracy theorists, Lab Leak conspiracy theorists, and it's driving engagement. It's like, you know, attacking the Trump administration.
This is audience capture at its best. Yeah, this is audience capture.
It doesn't mean that he's going to go on to keep doing that, but I can see like the pull, right? There must be, you're getting this huge amount of downloads. You're attacking, you know, the Trump administration. You're criticizing, like, you know, well, no, he was a convicted like child molester, but he should have been convicted more, right? But he's not, in any stretch of the imagination, these aren't good guys. So, but like for me, it's kind of like everything you're saying is right, and the coffee could present to me as, well, but hold on. So only the bad guys get to, you know, make use of that kind of emotional driven stuff. But for me, there's the danger, because then your audience is like, it's okay to anomaly hunt and stuff as long as the target is a bad guy.
I agree with you. And this is where I think we need to think about, to me, certain of these characteristics used in a nuanced way can be good. And so we've talked about polymathic ability. Certain science communicators, I think, do that well. I try to avoid it personally because I prefer to talk on archaeology, but archaeology is a very interdisciplinary subject that overlaps with a bazillion other disciplines. So to be honest, I talk about a lot of different disciplines. So polymathism to some degree is okay, just not to too much of a degree. I think anti-establishment sentiment, that's got to be right out, other than just nuancing the problems. Self-aggrandizement and narcissism, I think building parasocial relationships is fine, but you know, you can't go too far, because if you build up your ego too far, then we start seeing, you know, like what we're seeing with Sabine. And you know, like that's
another great example.
I met her last year. She seemed like a very nice person, and gave a semi-boring lecture at the place I was at. But she said she really liked my lecture, and that was really all we said. But so I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt until recently. But yeah, if you become too narcissistic and you don't realize that what this really is performative, you're playing being a celebrity and not letting it go to your head, because you have to do these things to develop a parasocial relationship and break through the noise, then that's a problem. So you can't go too far.
I would just say that, like, in some respect, a lot of the things that you're saying, like, you know, building communities and building connections with people. And, you know, in the thing that I highlighted, the danger and what we were talking about is like this binary Manichaean worldview of good versus evil, right? I don't think that's a good thing to do, but it is reasonable to say, you know, I value science, I value academia. If we think it's important, so, you know, if you support what we're doing here on the channel or whatever, you know, here's things that you can support. And there is the issue then, well, what's the difference, right? You're just picking a different target to promote than they are. But I think in all those cases, the reasonable version of it is not the characteristic that we're talking about. Like, cultivating communities is fine. Building up a personal, you know, brand is neutral in a lot of respects, right? Like, it can be used for good, it can be used for bad. But self-aggrandizement and narcissism is always like, and like you say, everybody is engaged in it in a certain response, especially people online, but everyone has a degree of, like, you know, narcissistic tendencies in them. but the level that you saw in those clips is the thing.
Yeah, that I'm with you with, and I think sometimes academics, especially students that start doing science communication, or even academics that I've talked to on my channel, sometimes we have in academia and in higher education this sometimes over humility, and we're scared to speak up when in fact we should be willing to put on the same persona we have in the classroom. And this is kind of my point always, is to bring our teacher persona to the public sphere. Because in the teacher persona, we're developing already a parasocial relationship with students. That's like, we're experts at doing that when we go up and we lecture and we do these kind of things. And we know also the dangers of that in academia. There's all these articles about romantic relationships and all the problems there, and they're very serious problems. I'm not trying to deny that. But at the same time, there are certain skills that we have as teachers and scholars that we should be able to think about bringing to the public realm. And I think too often what I see is either people might want to do stuff, but they do it in such a shy, they're very careful about what they say. They don't want to over speak in any way. So they end up saying nothing because it has too many wafflings and whatnot. And and at the same time, their personality is not there as well, which when they're teaching in front of a classroom, it's there. You know, we're good at bringing our personality to a classroom when we're there every week. And so that's kind of my point, is we need to be at the 2 on some of these, not all of them, but because some of them are just pure evil. Like we've said, anti-establishmentarianism, conspiracy theories, saying your revolutionary theories is just evil. Excessive profiteering is just evil. But some of these, you know, like the Cassandra complex, warning about the dangers of climate change, warning about the dangers of authoritarianism, is stuff that's going on right now. We don't want to be doomers either, but we have to walk that fine line of trying to explain to the public the serious situation we're in, and also saying, hey, in the past, humans have been resilient and have dealt with situations like this. If we think our way through this and we build community, we can actually impact the future. The future is not written in stone. Trying to do both is tough, but we have to try.
No, I agree with all of that, but it's basically, to me, and maybe it's an aspect of, like, you know, the way that we've conceived of the gurometer and whatnot, is like everything that you're saying about, like, you know, warning about legitimate threats, right? That like historians might notice, you know, the things from history about like fascist science, right? There might be some, you know, in the contemporary era that echo things in the past. That to me, though, is not what we are trying to pick up with like Cassandra complex. If somebody was doing that, we'd score them 1, right? Like if they were a climate change scientist, for example, warning about the impending danger, you know, posed by environmental change, because Cassandra complex is
so
more...
why was Carl Sagan a 2 then?
Well, in that content, I think he went, like, I can't remember it exactly, but I think he was talking about some speculative science fiction, destructive things like asteroids coming to blow up the planet and needing to build.
I guess part of my point is as scholars, we're oftentimes so careful. We're so afraid of making a mistake that what we miss is how to develop a human connection. And sometimes introducing, like I had on Paul Cooper, who wrote the book about Fall of Civilizations podcast and book. And he's an academic, and he is just amazing at being a bit Cassandra-esque, right? I think he goes beyond the reality of what science and history shows. But at the same time, he's so good at developing a connection with his audience. And he does, of course, bring in the nuance in the middle of the episode and stuff like that to do that in an appropriate way. It's his way of being dramatic, is by being maybe a 2 or 3 on the Cassandra thing, but then walking it back in the middle of the podcast or the middle of the book. Even the final chapter of his book is about living in the fallen ruins of our current civilization, right?
he might score a 2 or 3.
Yeah, I think he would. But it's very effective. It's what let him build an audience, and what has let him actually educate an audience with real up-to-date history content.
I was just going to say that on that, like, kind of notion about I don't know if this counts as like one of the guru characteristics, but it does talk to the dynamic in that we experience in our content. So I think you can do this without the sycophantic, like the stuff that makes me saccharine sycophancy, because it makes me genuinely unwell. Right? Part of that is because I'm Northern Irish. You lived in the UK. Flint, you know the general culture there, right? That people don't like that excessive praise. But the aspect about people at conferences or after conferences or having conversations with other academics that are not pitched at a very low, like pop science level, but actually are willing to go into the weeds, but in a way that is engaging and like discussing. That is something that academics do. It's something that like the alternative podcast sphere models a lot, and it has just blowhards, right? Like just talking about nonsense, like hospitals don't do anything and whatnot. And lots of people are saying this is the greatest conference. I'm so lucky to be able to listen into this. And I think that it is possible that academics are not all, going to have like super technocratic, jargon-filled conversations. They can have engaging conversations that people would be interested in. The only thing that gives me pause, and me and Matt have made this point many times, is like, so we just covered a guy called Gary's Economics, who is this kind of popular content creator focusing on wealth inequality, stuff that is admirable, right? But there are issues in that we perceive it as content. And one of the things he does is he talks about inequality is a problem, right? The solution is a wealth tax, a tax on the 0.1%, people earning over 10 million. That's the thing, right? One thing, the wealth tax, the housing. The reason housing is expensive is because the elites are stealing all the houses and the billionaires are buying them all up, right? Now, most of that is wrong to the point of like caricature, right? Now, his version is, but I have a YouTube channel with like 1.4 million people. I'm getting attention on this issue about inequality. And yes, my thing, like he also talks about all academics are lying or economists can't be trusted. But he has a popular following, right? And he has admitted in some interviews that he's oversimplifying, that his single solution wouldn't actually probably work if it was implemented. And to me and Matt, when we were talking about it, like hearing me and Matt talk about like what economists have responded and pointed out all these different features and all, it was boring. It was boring and complicated. And the individual, like, here's the one simple thing, those elites are screwing you over and thing. It's much more engaging. His personality is a better story. He was a successful trader and a working class hero, and now he's doing all this. And like our response sounds like it's nitpicking, it's academic, it's boring. But the reality is it's a very complex topic. There's lots of economists that are talking about it, there's lots of think tanks. And I don't know what to do there exactly, because like the reality is just inherently less engaging than the
I hear you,
simplistic message.
But Chris, I brought this up. You guys do a great job. You're funny. You have I don't know how many people listen to your podcast, but it's a lot. I have been recognized on the street, not because I was on Joe Rogan, but because I was on Decoding the Gurus, like on the street. And so, like you guys do a great job. And I think what you do is, and that's kind of the key. As scholars, we're trying to actually get across that nuance, right? And so I actually think one of the biggest problems, I was going to go to the neologisms and pseudo-profound bullshit. Obviously, we don't want to actually do neologisms and pseudo-profound bullshit. That's not my point here. My point here is that oftentimes when scholars communicate with the public, one problem they have is the one we already addressed, where they're too cautious and they overqualify everything and they oversight everything. And therefore their point just gets lost. The second thing that they'll do, we've already discussed this, is they only talk about their own research, which is also not consensus. But the third thing that they do is they act as if they're talking to children. And so they oversimplify. And sometimes, we need to recognize that using jargon actually gives you a certain level of standing, if you see what I mean. People don't really recognize it, but it actually is performative. And that's what those neologisms and bullshit type stuff is. And so I don't think a conversation that academics have in the public should include too much jargon, because if it just sounds like academic ease, it's not, with all the citations and all the whatever, it's not going to be digestible. But if we do get into the weeds of how we do things, and we do use a few terms and don't define them, that's fine. That's performative. It shows our expertise and our experience, which people respond to in a very good way. And so I think we need to be more confident, is my main gist here. People who want to communicate with the public from the point of view of scholars, what we've seen with this group of gurus is they exude confidence, right?
Yes.
And maybe too much confidence. But there are these things where we could take them to a very small level. We can use a little bit of jargon. We can bring some of our emotion and personality. We can, we can do this kind of stuff and have a little bit of drama and our personal story there to build a parasocial relationship. And as you said, we cannot be afraid of, having a Patreon and stuff like this. That takes time. This takes time. It takes energy. I can't do this without the support of my fans that help me, buy the second camera that we just shifted to, actually, as you can tell, it's shittier quality. But yeah.
I would say, Flint, that I agree in terms of there are things to be learned from the presentation, and you're right that there are aspects around expertise which are performative in a way. Even it doesn't have to be bad, right? Because there is actually performative aspects of being an expert in something. The thing which strikes me though, and this is I'll try to keep it brief, though I haven't for anything else till now. But the Sean Carroll is somebody that we covered, right? A science communicator, one that recently tangled with Eric Weinstein on Piers Morgan channel. And in that interview, he communicates very well. He's well-spoken. He has a podcast, right? He's a good science communicator. But he basically refuses to play most of the games that Eric is doing. And he counteracted him quite well, I thought, right? In that, in part, because like you said, he was willing to be assertive. There were points where Eric started to cut him off and he said, excuse me, Eric, I let you finish your point. That's been working well. Maybe let me just finish and then you can respond, right? And that takes having kind of experience and confidence to do that. But for that reason, he was able to respond, and he was harshly critical. He was directly critical. He had the confidence to do it, and it worked well. And, you are another example that you went to Joe Rogan, you weren't a shrinking violet, right? Yeah, and the audience responded well to that. So I definitely think there's something to it. The only pushback I'll give, and this is very idiosyncratic, it might not apply in general. So you said, Matt and I have been successful in our way. And that's true. The podcast is much bigger than we ever anticipated it would be, right? And it continues to grow, continues to be successful, and that's very nice for us. But one thing, and it might be specific to us, it might be because of the kind of podcast that we're promoting and this kind of thing. There's been so many opportunities as we've been doing the podcast where we've had people that wanted to network, to grow the audience, to do audience, I forget the term that people use, but crossovers, right? And we've had various episodes where we could promote it in certain ways. And in almost all occasions, we have leaned away from that. And we have in actual fact, whenever people have leaned towards that, it's made us less inclined to produce content together and things like that. And it hasn't damaged our growth at all. Maybe we could be much more successful than we are if we had leaned into things more. But even in the same respect, our audience, for example, because of the people we cover, they like it when we cover right-wing people more, right? Because a lot of the people we cover, as the clips have you highlighted,
drama.
they're pro-MAGA. But we recognize that there are plenty of people that come close to the template, or that left-wing figures can also be in there. And we've looked at people like Chomsky, like Gary's Economics, and so on. And the response from our subreddit and so on is often very negative. And the thing is, by my character and Matt's character as well, to a certain extent, that actually encourages me to do it, because I I like the kind of friction and stuff, and I want to kind of like push people to look critically at their own side and like things that they agree with, not just the stuff they dislike. I do think that we have resisted lots of the calls that we could have taken to like try to grow an audience and promote things, and we've had success. So
I guess what I'm trying to say is to also acknowledge how you guys do some of these things. You even just how you cover people, your entire format is set up around drama. It's set up to critique and to criticize, right? And so, you know, and in particular to do that towards celebrity people. Some of what I'm trying to challenge you to do is to see some of the positive, even in the negatives, and to start to recognize, to see some of the negatives in ourselves, and to then think through how to learn from it and how to all of us to be better going forward. Like, I agree. I think the one of the main things to do is not to sell the fuck out, right? If you are selling out, meaning selling out your ethics and your goals for the world and for your community for a profit and for an audience, fame and money and whatever else, well, then you're doing a really terrible job of being a communicator online, in my mind. We should hold everybody to very clear ethical standards. I am not denying that at all. All I'm trying to say is that in this online world, some of the rules of communication have changed. The social norms in how we present ourselves, because of algorithms and because of the expectations of the online world, we have to be clickbaity, we have to be dramatic, and we have to have some level of an emotional connection with the audience and a performativity to it as well, you know? And so just like, you know, you were talking about how you talk and you'll say things repeatedly because you expect to be edited, for example. You have this ingrained brain in how you perform now in ways that work for your audience and your niche and things like that. And I think we need to embrace that when we go on the internet. It's just like teaching. We have our teaching personas. I try to argue we should bring our teaching personas into the online sphere. And to some degree, I think all of these gurus that came from academia, they did that and then hypercharged it. And we need to do that without selling out our ethics and without selling out our values and our goals for improving the world.
Well, so like the two things that I think I'll just like finish off with, because I think you made like various good points there. But like so one is around delivery, like things like learning the skills about, you know, retakes, right, or speaking in chunks and like turn for turn, right. These are kind of things that like journalists and podcasters and public communicators develop, right, over time, and those are definitely skills that you can just learn for experience, right? Like, in the more, like if you produce podcasts or if you produce videos, you'll learn editing skills and these kind of things. I think that is stuff that there's absolutely no issue with. Like, you can become a better communicator. Anybody can, from where they are, even if they're already a very good communicator. And like when we interact with people that are polished communicators, it's notably different from people that aren't, right? Like, and it's very neutral in what they're promoting, because you can be like a good communicator producing bad stuff or whatever the case might be. But then the second point, so I like the notion, because I wasn't even thinking about this, like, because to me, when I think about drama, right, I think about fairly insubstantial interpersonal grievances, right, which is not how I tend to think of our podcast. But I understand like the critique, and that is often like leveled.
Wasn't meant as a critique.
Oh no, I know you weren't. But like the thing for me is like, I actually don't have any issue with people like directing criticism, like at Joe Rogan, right, or at Lex Friedman, or, you know, calling people out, whatever way it is. Like the kind of point I made about people put out their content, so, you know, it's important that people respond to it, like just the way you did with Graham Hancock. And to the extent that that is based on like drama, right? There was drama in your appearance with Graham Hancock. There has been drama in like various other public debates that have happened, or just, you know, asynchronous debates. That I'm perfectly okay with. I think academics shouldn't be so like kind of unwilling to engage in that, you know, seeing it unseemly, because yeah, I'm agree with that. But I think for me, the notion of drama and like online interpersonal parasocial stuff tends to be like more towards the like kind of farming interaction and like when I think about that, I think about all the exploitative aspects of it. And I think that you can do the first, like engaging in direct criticisms that is going to, drive like content or drive attention, without doing the second, or at least doing the second to a much lesser degree, where you're, kind of doing the wounded bird pose and all these kind of things. So that's
I think
maybe where
sometimes language of grievance is effective as well, and I don't shy away from it. I mean, they have attacked me, so why should I not acknowledge the ways that they have attacked me? If you see what I mean, to just not acknowledge that is also, and to not use it as a weapon in my arsenal, strikes me as silly when they are attacking me and trying to actually shut me out of public discourse. That is literally what these guys are trying to do by framing me as a liar, and when I didn't lie. And so, like, I should be responding in that way, and I should use the cancel culture rhetoric in a not to the nth degree. If you start using it to the nth degree, then it becomes disingenuous. But it's about framing it for what it actually is, if you see what I mean.
Oh,
and so,
I completely agree with using their own rhetoric against them in terms of, you are trying to cancel me, Joe.
Yeah.
Right? You are picking on
You're canceling me, bitch.
Yeah. And that, but like, to me, in that respect, like Milo Rossi or Professor Dave have mixed feelings about some of the rhetoric there, but like, let's stick with Milo. Milo doesn't pull punches, right? Like, he's very direct, and like, I don't see any issue with that. And I wouldn't say but like, to me,
but you might score some of it as a 2 or a 3 on your level.
Well, in his case, like, I often find that, like, to me, there's a distinction between, here is a criticism based on a very substantial, like, thing that you're doing. Like, it can be rhetorical, it can be interpersonal, but like, this is actually what's happening and you're doing, and I'm calling it out, versus like, I'm, kind of promoting drama, like, based on, like, I don't know, like, a less, like, just more personal attacks, right? And that kind of thing, because that person has really fucked you over. So you're just like, then, screw you. And I do think people deserve that. I do think people have acted in ways that are despicable, but just like me personally, I tend not to go towards that. I'm not saying I don't always do it perfectly, right? But like, for example, I mean, this is a very silly example, but I'll just say it as an example. Like, a lot of people online don't mind making fun of Eric's appearance, Eric Weinstein, right? Because he has like some, like, facial things, right? And that to me is below the belt, because like, so what, right? Like, it wouldn't matter, but it can be a very, like, it can be a funny one-liner that somebody makes or that kind of thing. And I know that that's a very easy example to say, like, personal attacks, right? That are about somebody's like body or whatever. But like, I will make fun of Joe Rogan for being a, like, roided up, like, little tool and stuff. But
there you go. See, I don't even do that.
Yeah, I mean, I do that because he does that to other people, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think he.
See, I disagree with you for doing that to Rogan. I've had plenty of videos now about Rogan, 2 long ones, and I've never gone that route at all.
Well, to me, the issue isn't like, I don't think that should be your primary attack, but I think if Joe Rogan is going to throw all these stones about the way people look and whatnot, that like, if you're in a glass house, you don't go around. And like, in his case, he's very insecure about the way he looks. Like, he's very insecure about it. He's often talking about it. He's often like defending himself from criticism. So you shouldn't go after other people if you don't like that as a line of attack. Now, in our case, we don't focus. We've never commented on that in our content, except I think I've called him Baldy a couple of times, like, just offhand. But I would say that about, general people as well. So I don't know. I think it's just, in some respects, there are just different approaches that people have, and it's reasonable to have different approaches. I think in my case, I'm embedded in this guru content day in and day out, so I see a lot of like where it goes, and I often see people getting worse, right? And you know, you mentioned
And I think
Sabine.
we've seen some of that, yeah, and that's a problem. And I think, like, I guess my point is modes of communication we can learn from, but we need to always be thinking about the ethics involved, and that's really, really important. And I think we should be judging other people with a strong code of ethics, applying it to them. And I think you guys do a great job doing that. When you decode these people, you don't just take an objective approach, you take an ethical approach, you know. And I think that that's important, which I guess sort of goes towards moral grandstanding. Whenever you're applying ethics, you're sort of doing that to a certain degree. But
but this is why this is like the kind of caveats that I think that are important to those things, because moral grandstanding in a lot of respects is like, you are doing this, like you are promoting this because you're doing it better, right, than the other people that you're critiquing, or your
don't
thing
you
is
think
better.
you were doing it better than the people you're critiquing?
Well, so no, but in the respect of like Matt and I's personal crusade and contribution, like morally, ethically, we're just normal people. We're not like moral exemplars that should be followed. And in science, we're just, you know, average academic. We're not going to revolutionize our fields. We're going to contribute. We enjoy doing research.
I don't think that's a fair assessment. I think you two have a very popular podcast that I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of people have probably seen it at this point, if not millions. And as teachers, how many thousands of students have you impacted?
Yes.
And so I tend to think that, like, academics are not elites in the sense that we have wealth and societal power in a very strong way. But at the same time, most academics, by the time you have your PhD, but really, let's say 10 years after your PhD, you're already a minor celebrity, because you have impacted in the classroom thousands of students, and you've engaged with thousands of colleagues as well at conferences and stuff like that, and the people that have read your literature. And so I don't know, I tend to think, don't be too humble to yourself, Chris, because you know, I think that you do communicate a clear set of ethics that I personally agree with, and I think is a better set of ethics than the one communicated by these gurus. And so I think that that's also important. We want to communicate our set of ethics from the point of view of academia and higher education, and there should be room for it, because we do strongly believe in diversity and inclusion and equity and tolerance, and in believing science and trying to do environmentalism and environmental justice. And so I think these ethics are ethics that should be communicated, and we should be praising them as good. Are they superior to every set of ethics out there? That's up for debate, but I think they are ethics that are valuable and need to be reintroduced into the public discourse and repopularized, if you see what I mean.
I'm not a moral relativist, but I've never looked at my academic career as like a minor celebrity. If it was, it's like a very disappointing minor celebrity.
Fine, but it is.
The podcast, however, you know, like that does have a bigger reach and that kind of thing. So there's perhaps more legitimacy in the comparison there, though again, I feel very deeply uncomfortable with that
You might feel uncomfortable about some hard truths, but they're hard truths, man.
Yeah, well, be that.
But I think this is important, though. I think academia needs more celebrities, is kind of my point. I saw somebody say this before I went on Rogan, or maybe right afterwards, where they were like, I might not agree. It was from the field, from archaeology. And they did it. They were like, Flint did a great job, but equally importantly, archaeology needs celebrities that can connect with the public, because so often archaeology is presented by non-archaeologists to the public, and so therefore they aren't getting our perspective. And the same thing I think is true for most disciplines in education and in scholarship. And so I think we need to embrace that we need not major academic celebrities, not the kind of thing of the 90s and the 80s and the 70s, the Carl Sagans that speak on everything and are mega gurus in a sense because they have such popularity. But I think with social media, it allows us to build our small little parasocial relationships with our communities that are going to be in the tens, hundreds, maybe millions, single digits. And I think that's a good thing, because we need to be represented in this public discourse.
I could talk with you about it like all day, because I think about that. I'm completely on board with like maybe 85% of the way that you present it, but then I just think of so many of the cases where there are people like Jonathan Haidt, for example, somebody whose academic work I like various aspects of it, but in his campaigning celebrity IDW type persona, right, he has much more impact. He's had impact on public policy, and he does a lot of the things that you're talking about effectively. And there's a lot of examples that I can think of like that.
And you know what? I think I figured it out. I think talking with you and looking at your guru things, I think number 7 is the key here. So many of the academics that become public figures, they become public figures because they're trying to present their own ideas, like an Einstein type character, right? And Einstein, of course, was a great guy. I'm not trying to criticize him, but obviously most academics don't have such paradigm shifting fucking things, right? We're all shifting paradigms with every single article we publish, but at the same time, it's not revolutionizing everything. It's incremental. And so I think that that's part of the problem. I think what we want more are academic minor celebrities that are more like the Carl Sagan model of I'm teaching solid science. Meaning I'm the Bill Nye type, where what you're doing is you're just teaching the basics of our field to the public and explaining it, rather than going out there and saying, I am the genius of my field. If you see what I mean. And that's why I think that, to me, that's the difference. And that might be the key to stopping that slippery slope of people that start thinking they're better than the rest of the field. Instead, what they're trying to do is push up their field and build community for the field, not saying that they're better than the field around them.
I'll just finish, Flint. The last thing I'll say, and it's kind of counter to my position, is I'm reading this book, The Genius Myth, by Helen Lewis, the British journalist. And, you know, she's covering various figures considered like geniuses, including people that, like, you know, are charlatans, but real geniuses as well, right? And part of her emphasis on the book is that, you know, there are these networks that are behind and involved with these people that often don't get credit, and a lot of myth revolves around them. There's a online channel, Angela Collier, I think her name is, who did one about Richard Feynman, like highlighting that a lot of his myth is based on the popular science books. He was a real, you know, scientist who contributed a lot to Manhattan Project and various others, but his myth is largely because of the popular science books about him, right? And and this is also the kind of message of Helen Lewis's book. But with all that said, the other aspect of her book is like, but part of the way that you know, people get inspired to do science and that people get funding and various things is that there are these myths and figures and larger than life characters, and some of them really do amazing things. They often go on to do stupid things later as well, but like, it is the case that, like, you know, the history of science is also full of like self-aggrandizing people.
Oh God, you can't get a grant. You can't get a funding grant unless what you're doing is revolutionary and innovative, and you use those buzzwords 1,000 times in your document. It's just not possible. There's been analyses of this, you know, and the trend in scientific language in scientific journals is moving towards everything being innovative and groundbreaking and whatever. And it's just, so it's a problem within the field in and of itself. And but I do think there needs to be room for academic celebrities to exist in the discourse, and we need to do a better job with them, because clearly these gurus are the worst of them. And as we're pointing out, there's other academic celebrities that might not be full-on gurus that are on their path there, and then ones in the past that have had checkered pasts as well. And so there is no solution other than humans are not perfect, but we also can't shy away from the public sphere, because what we're experiencing is full-on anti-science and anti-intellectualism led by many former scientists and former intellectuals. And so we have to push back. You know,
I also, you know, I've said about 10 times I'll shut up, but I promise I'll shut up after this. I'll just say that I think being concerned about these things is in a certain sense like a bit of an inoculation. The very fact that there is having these kind of discussions, or that it's something that, you know, because there is none of this in the guru sphere. They're not concerned about audience dynamics and that kind of thing. They're just concerned about like increasing engagement, getting more opportunities to, you know, interact with bigger figures and whatnot. So yeah, the hand wringing of academics and whatnot might be a problem, but I think it's also like a feature, which is probably, you know, good that it's there, at least in some respect.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's a good point to end on. Thanks you for coming on, Chris. This was awesome. I learned a lot.
It was. I like being, you know, pushed and being accused of being a drama farmer. So I like that. I know you didn't say that, but that's good. I like it.
Rhymes and riddles, tickle, tickle, giggle.